I was going to point it out that.
Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the boss being back. And just for your info, the Deputy Mayor is on holiday. Councillor Hori Pa is away still following their family bereavement, and Proctor is going late, but will be here some stage. I'm not quite sure of the others, that there have been any messages in the last 5 minutes.
Councillor Topoy just text me, she's just
Right. Yep, okay, so let's kick on. So the first, we've got our water presentations coming later. We've got Wellington and Wanganui presentations separately. First, we're going to talk annual plan. All yours, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So today we are going to talk in high level about changes in activity budgets. And we have all of our activity managers here today around the table. We did this at our senior leadership cohort where we workshopped this, and it went really well, so we wanted to bring this in and this afternoon in the same way. We will be stepping through each of the budgets, and we will have questions for each after that, aware that we have before other important sessions today. So, discussing changes of activity budgets, and we do look ahead at what implications this may have for our consultation approach, conscious also that there are other decisions that Council will be making as we head into the final part of the year. So we sit today in the know and do sections of our triangle particularly, so that you're aware of the reason where we're at with budgets. And today we do ask you to give us feedback of where it is, about where those budgets are at, and to provide any direction about further work you'd like to see. So we step through the activity budgets after a introduction from Jacinta, and we will talk through what's planned, what might change, new income streams.
Thanks. So I'll start by sort of framing it around the fact that we are here early this year. We're having a conversation with you, as we have done in the last couple of years, which is good to let you know where we're at in terms of our thinking. But to stress just straight from the start is we know we've got a 9.9% rates increase for next year that was planned in the long-term plan. And we're well aware, and through the conversations that we've had at the table and also ourselves, that that is already a significantly high number for the community coming off the back of the rates increase for this financial year. So all intentions or thinking from us is that that will need to come down. But what we wanted to do today is just give you a view of some of the pressures and challenges that we're facing across the activities, so that you've got an awareness of some of the conversations and the challenges that we're facing. Full intention is there's more detailed work already happening to think about different options, but it was important that we give you the full view, because I know in the first workshop when we had the conversations was that some elected members may have wanted to go down to a bit more detail in terms of understanding the budgets and understanding how we could even get them down further from 9.9. So this is an approach today that will hopefully strike that right balance for you from a governance perspective in terms of understanding those activity budgets, driving them, and also understanding that are faced with it. So first off, to start, and please jump in if you've got any questions as we go, is that 9.9% rates increase for next year. That was an LTP. A key factor of it, and we'll talk about it in the next slide, was needed to ensure we're balancing our operating budget by and a significant reason of change is increasing that rates level of funding for depreciation or loan repayments so that we can keep our borrowers below the limit. Standard & Poor's as well have given strong signals that rating key is critical to us, requiring us to continue to move to balancing our budget. So that balanced budget consider. This is a view of what the LTP year one versus year two movement look like in terms of the different drivers. The key thing I wanted to highlight on this slide is that within the 9.9% increase after growth, is 6.3% of that is due to making sure we are effectively funding our groceries with rates rather than with debt, and also the funding of depreciation is making sure that we are rates funding what's needed to keep our levels lower. So that's a significant reason why that rates increase is where it is proposed to be for next year. Now what we're going to do is I won't go into detail on these because each activity manager, as we talk about them, will talk about them themselves. But what we're intending to do, as you would have seen in the slides, is just talk you through some of those key reasons why. This is our budget. This column here shows our budget for this year, and year two shows what our budget increase had planned to be for next financial year, given that 9.9% increase. So at an indicative level now, and only indicative based on challenges we're seeing, that could potentially be as high as 11.6% if we made no changes and accepted everything as it was, which is not the intention, but it's good to understand it from where we're at. Some of those things driving that are, one of them around the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs program, so allowing us to continue that at the level that we're continuing at this year with less funding means that would need to be a rates impact and a decision from this table in terms of being able to continue that without the funding from the changes that have happened through central government. On the flip side of that, with some of the changes around the Levin Town Centre program, we are now anticipating to have some more commercial income, and that relates to us now. Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, just on that one, the other revenues. So saw this on that slide and was like, oh, that's a positive. But then later on in the slides, it has under the property activity an increase in expenditure of 100 grand, presumably related to those commercial properties. And so that kind of surprised me, just that there was that the revenue assumption is kind of eroded so much by the increase in expenditure because of those properties, well, presumably because of those properties. So happy to park that question until we come to it. But so because that the other revenue there is the sort of the takeaway that while there is an upside there, that comes with also part of that is offset by increased expenditure.
That's right. Lacey or David will cover that when we get to that point. And that's an active conversation internally as well as, does that level of expenditure look about right? Are there any conversations that we could have about decreasing that? Would that make sense? What does that mean? Those kind of conversations are happening internally at the moment. That's an initial estimate of what that might be. But you're exactly right in terms of those assumptions.
If I could just add further to that, the point around Mayor's Task Force for Jobs is that our expenditure reflects the revenue of the government, and so Jacinta introduced this with we've got more work to do. That's an example of that, where we need to make sure that we're not spending more than what we're receiving from the government for that program.
And as well, this next one, so we went through lots of work in terms of savings targets for the organisation, and we did really well this last financial year in terms of savings targets. We also had the organisational change program, which led to considerable savings for this financial year. And in year 3 of the long-term plan, we had a final 400,000 in terms of an additional savings target built into the budget. This is just to give a signal so that everyone is aware that savings target is sitting there within the budget. The implications if we were, for example, to say we actually want that savings target in, is $1,000 in terms of rates. So that's just to give that signal rather than to say we're proposing that needs to come out. In the maintenance space is a little bit, and Daniel and will probably talk through this from a solid waste perspective, but there is some additional disposal costs, and also in the aquatic space some additional chemical costs that we're anticipating might come through. So that's as well. The team have continued, as we've looked through the budgets, is to look at areas where potentially might not need to have all of the budget that we've got. So one area is in the community grant space. I'll leave that for the team to walk through as well. The other expenses is a significant one there. There's a few things that relates to. One of them is with final rates being struck by all the councils, we actually, our internal properties ourselves have some additional rates that we need to pay. As well, insurance costs continue to be those costs for commercial properties we'll talk through in a moment, and also some additional fees that we're seeing in terms of infringement filing fees and other general operational expenses, which you'll see as we work through each activity slide.
So like one line that struck me a little bit was training, in terms of how that's doubled over the last couple of years. Is there any particular reason why that is done?
Can you leave that with me for a second? Because their training from a central staff training perspective has only gone up by about 50 or it hasn't been that significantly. So there might be another element to that line that I need to explain to you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I seem to recall from our conversation last year that it was the way that the training used to be under the different activity areas, and then it was now centralised into one line. I think that was the. Yeah.
I'll double check that one for you. The other one is around interest. When the OPR gets released today, there is some pressure around interest. We're very much in the detail with it. There's some upward pressure potentially of up to an extra $300,000 for this financial year. Most of that, though, relates to the fact of the timing of the CIP interest-free loan. Because in our assumptions, we had planned that we would get that in this financial year. And so not having that interest-free loan has a direct impact in terms of our interest costs. So while from a borrowings perspective, it looks okay, from an interest perspective, it is pressure. We think we can bring that down. We're actively working on it to close to the budget for this financial year. But we just wanted to flag that it continues to be an area of challenge. We have just received some updated forecasts from our Treasury advisor this morning, so we're yet to work through those. We think we can get there, but just wanted to flag it as a potential issue.
Would it be possible at some point to see what that number looks like if we strictly applied our interest rate assumption in the LTP over the next 2 years, like just to see what that looks like? Because I imagine that's a big increase because you're trying to get it closer to actuals, right? Based on but would it be possible to see that number just if we base it purely on the LTP assumption?
Yep, that's fine. What we might do, just so it's really clear, is excluding the CIP interest-free loan, including the CIP interest-free loan, and assumptions around interest as well. That's fine.
Thank you
yep.
so much.
Why is it taking so long for that the CIP decision?
Progression of the project generally. A lot of that has been tied up with the O2L project.
Okay, right. In terms of locking that
Alignment, and the progression of the WA project.
So it's not their fault as such.
It's
Not their fault as such. It's just the timing of
just the nature of
okay.
program delivery. Yeah, there's that's involved.
So that's the high-level view of the challenges that we're facing. Some other things that we just wanted to highlight that are not currently included but could have some conversations around them. We're actively having conversations around them. So berm mowing is one that we know is a feature of ongoing conversation for the council, but wanted to highlight at this stage. We haven't ourselves built it into any modelling, but are aware that may be a consideration for the table as we talk mentioned as well, aligning that Mayor's Task Force for Jobs funding that we receive with expenditure directly. We have for example, we decided to align it exactly. That would mean that 11.6% that we just talked about would come down by a further 165,000 because that funding had been reduced. As well, around the waste levy, we are expecting significantly more funding, some more this year and some more in the next financial year. So ongoing conversations internally about what does that mean. Is it reasonable that a proportion of that could be used to help fund recycling, for example, or help produce rates? Is that something that can reasonably be justified in a sense? So that's a conversation that's ongoing as well. Interest costs, as we just talked about, are something that could be an issue, but we're working on actively. And also, as you mentioned, Councillor Jennings, one of the other ones as well is the fact that we had some conversations through the Town Centre program about any net income from commercial properties being ring fenced to use specifically for Town Centre. And so because that was the case in some conversations, we felt it was like that, because this conversation, we assumed it is a net benefit to rates at this stage. Absolutely, that's a conversation for the table as we work through.
Can I just ask a question about the waste levy? And I know we're coming to it. But is that so? That's not just a lump sum that's provided based on multiple previous years. That's like an annual entitlement for the 25-26 years. That's the levy we're entitled to because of the volumes for the 24-25 year. Is that how it works?
It's effectively taken as a straight line out from what we're forecasting to be this year in the 24-25 financial year. So it's effectively made up of the cost. It's a levy. So top line is we're incurring $10 a tonne for all waste that goes to our district, and that's paid by the private sector, the homeowner, but also by us through our transfer station. Back as a levy, encourage waste minimisation. It's a sum total of that revenue that goes into that bucket, and that's distributed out on a population basis. So in the last couple of years, we've been probably gaining more of that levy, slice of the pie due to the population increases. We make the assumption that the levy won't be reduced, but there's also the opportunity that it could increase further. But effectively, the budgets that have been set up in that solid waste activity at the moment, an assumption would be needed to be funneled back into recycling this year and into next year as well. And so, as we get further through this annual plan process, if we were to make a decision to start stockpiling, putting a reserve fund away for future WFB, we would need to kind of understand that they would have a direct rate line impact. We wouldn't benefit from the savings that's currently forecast. There's a particular slide.
Okay, the next one before we move on to the activity section is highlighting what those cost adjusters are looking like for this financial year. So when we set the long-term plan, 2026 cost adjusters in terms of effectively the inflation that we apply to our budgets, that's what they were looking like in the half range. They're now increasing from 3 to 4. At this stage, we haven't built in any additional cost adjusters into our assumptions, but we wanted to make you aware that they're sitting there. We will be assessing, as we get into the detail a little bit more, specific contracts, and we have been doing that about what that means. Is there actually any specific contracts where we may need to increase them up to this level? Otherwise, it's likely that we will try and keep within the inflation assumption that we've got for the long-term plan, rather than. Lastly, just that there are areas where more information still is needed, and those around insurance, gas and electricity, other costs that are coming up for next year that we just don't have the detailed information on yet. Now I will pass you over to Mark to go over
Thank you very much, Jacinta. First cab off the rank. So, community facilities and services. First of all, you'll see in your slide packet on the screen in terms of what's currently planned. I won't spend too much time on that. In terms of what might change. But firstly, regarding our income streams. So for us at the moment, we haven't identified any new significant income streams. What I would say though is that there is some minor work happening in our aquatics programming space around making sure that our aquatics is business favourable. So there's some minor changes there. Moving on to our risks and challenges, and Council's happy to take questions. Risks and challenges, probably want to spend a small bit of time around gas. We are unsure at the moment the impact, but we probably can expect an increase or even a difficulty. Especially at a national level, gas production is dropping. That's what we're hearing. We are in a position where we have been able to pricing up until but I think it's a conversation or a flag right at this point around they need to look at what we budget for that, but also what does decarbonisation look like for our facilities, and just kind of putting that to something that might need to be considered. Noting that with gas, when it comes to gas supply as well, around who are our priority users and say hospital, for example. Councillor Jennings.
Oh no, it's not about gas, so I'll wait.
Okay, great. So just that's probably just a bit around gas that we could probably just wanted to flag a challenge. So moving forward into so just wanted to cover off a few points here. So regarding Fox and Pools, prior to opening, obviously we are best to forecast what that would look like once the facility's open. Looking at currently a 20k income forecast reduction. However, that like our Fox Swim School, that's seeing great guns, great numbers because of the year round being open, and so we're actually looking at that because we had a bit of a concern in there and increasing that. Also around our income lines, LAC facility hire, we are looking to increase that because we're making good money in that space too, so we're full income. Just regarding then expenditure in the aquatic space, so in terms of our maintenance costs, we are seeing reactive HVAC maintenance, aging plant, as I've talked about before at this table. We are keeping our plant online and that. I will cover a little bit around chemical costs. Chemical costs due to supply has slightly increased. What I would say about that is, and I won't go into full detail, but I have just in chlorine. It's where we're putting it into place, but it's too early to tell in terms of what that means around budget, and I've asked the team to go away and some cost analysis around what does that actually mean, because I'd like to say because that new system would actually be able to be a more cost effective, and then just some minor changes around our cleaning costs, around maintenance and compliance. I'll pause there a second if there's libraries and community centres.
Yeah, I know it's not very much money, but the 20k revenue assumption for Fox and Pool did stand out for me because I know that the revenue assumption that we had in there was pretty small, but it was quite modest. And so does that signal that we might need to look at, is there an adjustment to the operations in terms of hours and other things that we're trying to offset that? So obviously can't make up the revenue, but reducing the expenditures to kind of match or align to the downgrade revenue assumption.
Yeah, Councillor, I think my first, when we were looking at that and we were mapping that out, my first reaction was I think we've got to do some work to actually I think we'd probably go away with expenditure or that we could look
based upon those figures, so that there's 20k over a period of basis. So
yeah, you've done the maths, Councillor Grimstone, but yeah, without that direct in front of me, yes. And so that's what I would like. That would be my. What does that look like? What does that activation look like? I think we've got some work that we can do in that space.
What's the period of time of that? What period of time is that from the opening and early this year?
Yeah, so good point. It'll be.
So it could look quite different. Like period through next year.
Tim might make some gains.
What? Yeah. Yes, as part of that. What I would also, and I suppose the other factor to allow there is the seasonal difference. So the way that's prorata, so based off the time that we were open with a trend. Yes, noting that we've got a Christmas period coming up.
Yeah.
Who knows? Like we weren't open this time last, so there's some assumptions there. I still,
It still would be interesting to know, Mark, the difference that being open over the winter in terms of whether that actually was worth, because we were only open 8 months a year, now we're open 12. So that extra 4 months through the winter would be interesting just to know what those stats are like over that time.
yeah.
I don't think it's just the stats either, actually. I think it's the operation. So even if the pool was closed.
I'll keep moving on just in terms of libraries and community centres. Again, some revenue changes here. AA is making good money within Te Takiri Tango Kura. We are looking at a reduction in charges, what we were forecasted. Capital investment into the collection. Therefore, obviously, we're not premium items for our collection. Slight reduction there. Minors around photocopying revenue, software fees, etc. But that's pretty minor stuff. But happy to take any questions on libraries and communities. That's the case. We are straight into community sport. That was thank you. So just into community sport before I hand over to David for this part. But obviously, again, what's planned there in front of you. I suppose what might change, I'll start with my bits around community grants and funding. Done a bit of work to tidy up the different lines in our community grants and funding. We had, since budgeting, we've done some work. A couple of the groups have actually wound up and didn't require funding. We did some work in the last round where we had different groups applying on behalf of contracts, so Surf Lifesaving, for example. We've merged funds, we've tidied up the lines, which has essentially resulted in a 3K difference that we can claw back. And then we've touched on the what Monique has said, which is essentially the funding that we receive is the funding that we receive. So we need to reflect that budgets. And David, did you want to?
Speaking to the top line there, we put it as a not quantified. So it relates to economic development. A number of you are involved in a conversation last week, which is part of the Section 17A review process. We're aiming towards bringing a report to Council in December. At the moment, the LTP is a continuation of the current level of funding, and that's based on the current service delivery model. Obviously, in the Section 17A review, you need to consider a range of different ways that service could be offered, and as a result of that, there could be cost implications between whether it was in-house, out-house, or some version of what's currently done. So, what we're signalling there is that number that's currently budgeted might be different decision that you may make. Signal that.
Sorry, a couple of questions, Mark. I see the training stuff has been taken out, so I assume that's where the other bits have gone. I see other expenses though has doubled over the last few years as well, and also the community grants and funding money that you are anticipating coming back. I would have thought with the amount of applications we're having in terms of being well over the amount that we've got to give out, that there wouldn't be anything that we wouldn't be giving away.
You're referring to the 33K? Yeah. That's mainly referring to our contracted community groups funding, so those lines, rather than the community funding areas. There's some very minor tweaks in the community funding. Your slightly increased a lot of funds for that exact reason, that the amount of applications supported that. They're not impacted. It's simply a budgeting error, kind of tidying up lines. But I can assure you that we're not saving money from giving money out.
So we're just moving into community structure now. Oh, yeah.
Can I just jump back? So to Bernie's question, the explanation for that increase just in the other expenses line, that I was just interested, because I couldn't remember going back to the workshop stuff, what that was.
Drill into it a little bit more to say, I think that might be a similar merging situation where we've tidied up some lines. I think, if I remember correctly, working with the finance team, it was a matter of a number of different names for different lines and tidy it up and I'll check that for you and come back to you.
So some of it will be reflecting the investment and destination management. Destination management comes under this. It sounds like we could do some explanation to that. Should we move on? I'll go straight to what might change. So I am speaking about electricity pricing, however, noting that it's likely to affect a number of other activities. So the electricity pricing, like gas, is actually confirmed to January 2027. However, you may recall that we've got a target in place within our budgets to reduce consumption by 2.5%. At this stage, we are just indicating that we're unlikely to make these reductions without kind of pursuing some efficiency options and then needing some CapEx to implement some of those solutions. In terms of but I do just want to highlight that this is an area that we're monitoring and looking at ways that we can report back on more to see how we can make some changes. Before, we have just indicated some more thermal costs in there, keeping in mind that this would need to be a decision of council. If it was full reinstatement, we would need to go out to consult with the community. We have at this stage scheduled in a briefing with council around different options. And then the maintenance of the Manukau main, there are new facilities which will be installed in the coming months. This is from federal funding and the ongoing maintenance of these toilet facilities is estimated to be based off a similar toilet facility which will be open similar hours. Questions on this one at the moment?
In regards to your further emissions, I assume the emissions board will be helpful in identifying areas that you could make 2.5%. Actually, that capital spend required if there was an ROI, and it potentially come from some of the climate change allocated.
Correct.
Lacey, can you remind me, are we fully exhausting the Better Off funding for the Manukau domain works? Like, is there any left over for that? Okay.
And then just moving on to which I'll go into the what's changed there. You will see across a number of activities the electricity part. We do have, as Jacinta highlighted at the very beginning, we do have a number of contracts in place which where it's not verbal CPI adjustments that we have to add in, so we're not completely clear what it looks like at this stage, but just raising it now. As you mentioned, there is an income increase from our commercial properties. The expenditure related to those commercial properties is based off what our current commercial property expenditure is. That's how we've got to that number. Yes. Any further questions on that one?
Yeah, my thinking would be just that I'd like us to try and sharpen the pencil on that assumption, because I think that given the future for some of these buildings in terms of the town's redesign, I wouldn't want us to be investing too much in improvements. Like, it would have to be really like core, like core Warren Fitness type, that kind of standard of maintenance rather than improvements. So I'd be looking to try and sharpen the pencil.
Completely understand, and we will certainly look into that a bit more, keeping it in mind that the expenditure costs that we foresee are to do with maintenance for building warranty fits, for example, or fire compliance. And then potential change might be property disposal. So whether that's an increase in income based on disposal of property, or a decrease in income and a decrease on ongoing expenditure costs if that property is leased and disposed of. So this slide is just kind of highlighting all this. Mentioned. Are there any further questions on the property?
Hello everyone. So for land transport, a lot of this is going to be contingent on the council meeting on the 30th of October. Transport budgets. NZTA have taken a lot of our budgets away. They seem to be spending it all on State Highway 1 at the moment. But the figures on the screen are likely a little bit out of date, or will change depending on the operational expenditure is forecasted to reduce with either approach option that's taken in the meeting. I don't want to bring the conversation too much, but effectively we're looking to exhaust our subsidy allowance. So that they have operational unsubsidised expenditure increasing, which would have a expenditure reduction of $200,000 to $400,000 $400,000 from the 3755 for this financial year. That figure is sort of similar for the following two financial years, but trends downwards a little bit. Before I move on, is there any question on? So no particular specific risks that we've gathered from testimony. We're fairly confident should cover us for what we've allowed for the budget. The business contract has no cost fluctuations. We put them in the contract for the first year, just like in year two. And it's hard to multi-year reduced cost index. Historically doesn't really vary from the bill transport rating. Overall, we have a reduction in NZTA income, which we are for the reduction in operations and gigs.
Kia ora everyone. So having a look at the regulatory services activity, just wanted to note on this slide here that the increase in revenue from 2023, 2024 to 2025 on is relative to in relation to the changes that were made during the LTP process around non-registration fees increasing and parking. So just want to note that on the screen. All of these relate to the compliance activities. We've got expected to receive about $10,000 less income for swimming pool inspections. That's for a number of reasons. One, the team have done a lot of work identifying when in the 3 years each property requires their inspection as opposed to when the pool was installed rather than a 3-year cycle. So there's that, as well as we've seen a reduction in the number of pools a reduction in the number of pools on our register, which is possibly indicative to the owners' ongoing costs relating to those pools. A number of those pools have been above ground pools, so they're the sort of pop-up pools that you'll see around summer, but actually a number of them are also in ground pools that owners have chosen to empty. It works out to about 55 pools that have come off the register. The next one there, the infringement filing fees were increased from 1 October this year by the Ministry of Justice. They've increased them by 45%, so that additional expenditure in relation to that, up from what was $30 each infringement filed to now $55 each infringement filed.
Can I just ask a question about that one? So, from memory, that fee isn't recoverable from, is it? From the person that's been fined?
So, yes, it is. It's recoverable. It's a fee that we pay to the Ministry of Justice. We can then collect it back as part of the collection costs. But some of those costs can take up to 5 years to actually come back to us. So we see those as costs that come in for that for the following financial year.
So will this impact on our decisions on which infringements to send to the Ministry of Justice? Because if there is, without getting into too much detail, like if there's some really low value infringements and the chances of long-term recovery be limited, would we potentially adjust our approach to kind of offset that?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Jennings. Hadn't considered it, but yes, certainly something we can put some work into to try and first identify those infringements that are less than, say, $200 direct ones to the less, what is now $20 parking infringement at a metre. So yeah, we can do some work on that.
Thanks.
The next one there is in relation to abandoned vehicles. So we're seeing a lot more abandoned vehicles around the district, and there are some costs that come with that in terms of going out to collect them. We can't chuck them on our back and move them to the impound yard. There's some towing costs that are associated with those. And then the other one there is mobile shops. So just as we're doing analysis on where we spend our money and where we can make savings, businesses are doing the same thing. And what we're seeing is where there used to be a number of mobile food businesses that registered on their own, we're actually seeing them as part of a food business shop or outlet. So they're incorporating it into the same. So this just goes through much of that. Parking infringement fees have gone up from the 1st of October as well. And so what used to be a $12 ticket is now a $20 ticket. And the disability parking ones have gone up the most significantly from $150 to $650. Just in this slide here, I've made note of that. There's actually a typo in there saying this is likely to favourably impact the parking income. It's say this is unlikely. And the reason for that is because people still have the same amount of money. So just because they're going up doesn't mean we're going to see that money come in. In actual fact, some of that might be a double ping on us as we pay that $55 infringement filing fee to the Ministry of Justice to collect that money later on.
Can I just ask about it? Because it's kind of the accounting treatment of that parking fine revenue, but because we're kind of a perpetual entity, like presumably you don't have to do anything fancy with the accounting treatment. Where like there's expenditure going out, but there's like a contingent revenue assumption that in 5 years we might get the $55 and $200 coming in. So how do you treat that?
Sometimes they'll do a high-level assessment of whether we need to discount it or treat it in a different way.
Good afternoon. Solid waste, we've touched on some conversation earlier around the changes, so I'll jump straight there. There has been some slight cost increases in the waste levy of around $10 per tonne. The upside of that is that ultimately it does funnel back to us in the wider revenue from waste generated in the district via that waste levy. And with this year in particular, obviously decisions will need to be made as part of council operational expenditure, but also as we move into this year that we expect that levy would be utilised to offset recycling. That's fully within the intent of that levy, and that would just be something that an officer will budgets up on that assumption, but we would need to come back to members to ensure that there was widespread support for that. There is also a forecast being put in off the back of some early downward trends in bag sales. We had a slight uplift to the increase in costs, but there's been a bigger downward slide in terms of the revenue from those bag sales, and that won't be fully offset by the savings cost collection. So there is a mechanism within the contract where we can look at both the weight of the bag and do a survey, but also the number of bags and claw back some of the cost savings. But that wouldn't be enough to offset the revenue drop from the bags at this stage. So the very early numbers will come back as we get more information on that in the coming months. But at this stage, it was just an early signal that there is a potential risk around bag sale revenue that was built into the original budget.
70,000 seems a lot low. Daniel, that's 1,000 bags a month almost. It's huge.
The team have done some numbers, and like we were saying, we're working on a small sample size of a couple of months. They've extrapolated that out, but we could either leave it in there or remove it entirely and wait to get more information at hand. But at this stage, it does look like trend is a significant reduction in sales. So we can, I'd like to come back with some further numbers, and I've asked the team to actually get all that down into a spreadsheet with the workings, and we can share that as part of a decision-making process around annual plan and setting up the detailed cost.
Dan, what is the timeline for decisions on those top two? Because, like me and Bernie said, my expectation was that a reduction in bag sales is actually a good thing, because they're subsidised at the moment by the disposal and subsidised by the general rate or the solid rate. So I was surprised by that number, because I thought overall it would actually be a net benefit. So if we didn't want to tolerate that kind of if we didn't want to continue that continued subsidisation, so loss of revenue that exceeds the benefit and the perceived gain in reduced expenditure, what are our decision points and dates for that?
I guess top line's the easiest one, because that's automatic in terms of that rate set, so that's just an additional cost. Obviously, the volume base was reduced through the transfer stations, and that 70k would be less. In terms of the second line item, what we will look to do is come back with a whole lot more evidence when we present early findings around Section 17A review of the business case. That's right. Because the easiest mechanism to address that would be to remove that bag service, because that would eliminate the cost. But what Office of Forecasting is that we're expecting a revenue from when we budget for set for long-term plan, post decision on bag rate, that 70k is a direct reflection of the revenue loss that we're forecasting, noting that some of the cost by that service can be clawed back by the contract, but it wouldn't be enough to offset that revenue impact, because there's an economies of scale that if the truck's driving down the street to pick up 10 bags, 8 bags, it's not necessarily a pro rata split. So I would like to say that information's still being compiled, because we've only got almost like an election cycle, which is really early numbers, and the team have done their best to sort of signal that there could be a risk, but we'd like to come back with more information that can be scrutinised and agreed on. So we could almost add in the range of 0 to 70, or post decision on 17A, that's a good segue for that, is that there might be a decision more holistically around bags in general that would drive a more significant change. And that would be something we'll come back in December, decisions into next year, and then likely LTP 26 amendment or annual plan consultation. In terms of local waters done well and Three Waters in general, we're forecasting no change in the overall budgets. And when I say overall, there's actually a lot of things that will change and do change on a monthly basis within that activity or those activities. That's being magnified by the process that we're going through at the moment around in-housing consultant and maintenance services. So we have focused at this stage no forecast overspend for that activity. There are a whole lot of revenue and savings opportunities that we will have a lot more certainty as we start to bed that waters in-house. I would like to point out, though, in this particular slide, if we look at some of the budgets historically from 21 through into the year 2022-23, we're doing waters now cheaper than we ever have, even with significant increases in operational costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars in sand, chemical supply. We've managed over the last 2 years to actually shift the trend back quite significantly, and a lot of that's been driven off the back of eliminating consulting costs. We're now doing a lot of sampling work, a lot of that management around our wastewater sites. That's all now being done in-house, and it's been established, so that's driving the saving. And we also have built in the savings from not extending the Orphan Alliance contract. So those are actually into this year, so you'll see a similar budget forecast in this year and next year. This year still does sit as our biggest challenge. Savings in from day one, knowing that there's a number of one-off costs that we are incurring through the transition, and there's also zero extreme weather event or other budget. And so what we attempt to do is absorb those through our operational cost savings. Those will be regularly reported, but we're really not going to put a picture on that until quarter 3 of this financial year. So as we move into the February, March period, we'll be able to really button down final forecast for this year. As an example, just the recent weather events in the Tokomaru, Levin, Shannon, impacted by weather events. We've had to truck water. Head skier event, some up to around about 50k just trucking water, 70k in trucking water costs alone. We start to add sort of staff time and the like. We are at the mercy of times, and obviously, there's a number of those costs that we continue to face. Further consideration is around delivery of area resource and partnership agreements, primarily to our wastewater facilities. So we are doing some work with our area partners to breathe life into those agreements, and there will be some upcoming decisions around whether they are loan funded and we can actually utilise some of the savings from that transition to operational. But there's a process and a further paper that will be brought to council. We're not at a stage at this point to determine exactly when and how those agreements will be delivered, but there's ongoing discussions progressing quite well across Shannon facilities and Tokomaru with Ngāti Whakatiri, and also with in relation to the pot. And a site visit next week to Matakaraparai. Long-winded way of saying no change, but there's a lot changing. No questions? I'll hand over to representation.
Yeah, not too much here. The budgets are largely the same. Sorry, not much change in this one here. The budget's largely the same from this year to looking at next year. The one that we did flag through the budgets was recognising that the $50,000 for the carbon emission portal, when that had been entered in, had been entered in for 4 years. It was only needed for this year in terms of establishing a reduction from future years' budgets. I think we're over to Jacinta for.
Okay, I'll jump in on this one. So this one is slightly unusual in this activity in that within this activity it includes those cost centres or those areas that are allocated out. For example, local waters, the cost of the local waters program, that Downers Alliance contract, sits in here because it then is allocated to the 3 different waters. So it has to sit in one place as a starting position. So that's why they're shown within here, and why the costs might look a little bit higher than they usually would. So things like interest and as well the types of activities that are then allocated across the business, because the views that we've shown you today are not the views, they're the direct costs that the activities receive rather than including all the overheads, just to make things a little bit easier. So that's why we've shown this last view for the treasury support, which is everything else that the business faces. So some of the things that we're talking about in this space are risk and assurance. Last week, Nikki and Christian from Data Cubed gave quite a detailed conversation around the IS environment, challenges in that space, and one of those conversations was around our SQL servers, and potentially we may need to upgrade and multiply the different applications that sit within them, have more ability to process. They hold things like our core enterprise system authority, as well as which is our infrastructure asset management system and core applications across the business. Within here as well, there's a few timing differences that are proposed to change in and around the election. So some of them were just a mistake in terms of some of those budgets were put in, so some of those are coming in. The most significant one there, the two highest ones, one is a potentially that might increase up to about 55,000. We're still waiting on the final numbers, but that's an indication of what they're looking like at this stage. Well, another one that I mentioned was around rates expenditure and to costs of our own properties and what we pay for rates. That could be up to around 110,000. Another one is a proposal which we're actively working on to bring back to a new, is with the focus on improving our overall IS environment. We had some funding in this current financial year that's helping us fund the DataCubed resource and the contract with them to help improve the overall extremely well, and we'd really like to continue that work into the next year. So what we are doing as a team is we're looking at where the work across the team might be able to be done. It's related to capital project. Can we capitalize some of that staff time into capital projects so that we can minimize that impact down to nil if we can? So that work is happening at the moment. As well, just to highlight up the top, we haven't yet formulated or got that into a proposal, but the Council's GIS application is a very old one. We're one of the only ones that are on it. So to progress forward and to allow capability around our emergency management, general and shared services, we may look to bring forward some of the work around GIS and actually upgrade potentially in this financial year or next year, so that we're GIS. I think that will serve us well in terms of emergency management, integrated growth, all sorts of things for us to do a good job. But we've got funding within the overall IS environment, but it's just might be asked to be that we might. Well, that last one there is around the target and flag it. That it is within our budget, and there may be a conversation about whether that's still appropriate to apply that going forward. Before we finish up on this bit, I thought I'd just quickly answer a few of the questions that have come out. So one of the questions we had was around training. So we actually have, as an organisation for this current financial year, there is $510,000 in terms of training across the business. That includes health and safety training and any other training that the aquatic staff, all the training that the team receives. If you look at that on a per staff basis, it's approximately $1,800, but that includes all training that the organisation receives. Last financial year, the reason why that looked a little bit lower was that we actually, in terms of savings, some of the training didn't go ahead as we planned. If we didn't really need to spend it, we didn't. And some of the areas impacted by that was training as well. For this financial year, we did an increase of about 70,000 in terms of our training. So that's now sitting at 510 in relation to the year 2 by a potential $40,000 more. So that's just to flag what that training. I think there was another one around other expenses sitting in the community support area. I can confirm that is the majority that does relate to destination. I think those might have been. In terms of the capital program, we've had the conversation as I know coming to the council, the next council meeting, are conversations around moving some of the timing of the projects from this year into next year. and also changing the timing of a few of them, given particularly what is happening in the land transport space. At this stage, we don't have any specific programs of change to put forward for you, other than the ones that we've already talked about through the workshops with to the council table. We haven't, I'd say, got into the capital program for next year yet that we have for. So the only one that specifically mentioned for it, which wouldn't require any more funding.
Do you want comments? Not yeah. Love your GAs, but sooner we'll save money. As far as a capital investment in SQL Server, I couldn't possibly endorse that, given that it's happy to see a move to what's like a Snowflake data lake solution. That's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. And as we come to a close, was there any other further feedback that you'd like to provide us as we continue?
I was just going to make a comment, Caro. It's interesting, isn't it, that there's a lot of assumptions around, I suppose, positive assumptions around revenue might be increased, but there's also positive assumptions that costs can be decreased, and I just wonder what the risk is if we're 5% out on either of those assumptions. What impact does that have? Especially, I mean, there's a number of flags there in terms of cost, especially that could be quite instrumental in terms of where we finally land, and I'd just be, I'm just a bit sort of cautious about how that might impact the final figures.
Good question. I guess from our side, as we work through them, we've highlighted them all to you. For us, for example, the local water transition, we have kept that, so we haven't assumed any savings, any additional savings to what, as Daniel mentioned, what we've already assumed. The waste levy, any additional waste levy at this stage, we haven't done a reduction at this stage because we know we've got challenges around costs. But absolutely right, we have to be extremely careful to make sure that, and that's one of the reasons why I think we include for everybody as well, so that all the things that we're facing in terms of potential pressures or benefits. For example, we've got an ELT session next Tuesday where we give you the option of looking at the different voting options for different savings options or things we might be able to do. We've all been through that and last week, and ELT have currently got that very thing with them to work out what's the most realistic option for us. Increase that gets to 9.9% at the highest level.
Yeah, that was going to just be part of the things I wanted to raise, that it's 9.9, but it's actually 11.6 because it's got the growth assumption component. So that's going to be part of the question in terms of modelling, is how confident are we based on where the market's at in terms of hitting that growth assumption, and so should we be modelling not hitting that, what does it look like if we're only achieving 75% of the growth that we're expecting, because that would have a flow-on impact to that number. So presumably some work on that. Do you want to?
Sure, yes, good question. And absolutely, Blair and his team are helping with that work, doing that work at the moment. So that will absolutely form part of it to make sure that 1.7%, we assumed 1.6% as an average for this last financial year, and but it is, as the market slows, it's important that we do get that right. So absolutely, that will form part of the work that we do.
And presumably that'll flow into also the DC revenue assumptions. Yep. And then just the last question was, we talked about interest rates. which was just the reval impact, and we've talked about that at risk and assurance. But at the moment, the assumptions around in the LTP around the impact of the revaluation on depreciation requirements, we're within where you can manage that through the numbers, through the existing assumptions.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor James. So for depreciation, because we did the roading revaluation and waters valuation as part of the 23-24 they currently, based on the modelling that WSP have provided us as part of that review, that impact on we're able to meet the depreciation costs this year without budget. So we budgeted in line with where things have ended up, which is good. So for next financial year, land and buildings is the most significant one for an increase. We will do assessment. We haven't done it at a detailed level yet to see whether, so land doesn't have any impact, but whether buildings has any impact or not, we'll need to reassess and make sure we've got that assumption about right.
Good. So just checking, because we've already got an assumption built in, it's just whether it lines up. It could be lower or higher, just and that's where the impact comes.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess a question about a lot of TBC costs in here. So, which of those are you most nervous about? Which potential rate rises is that? The second piece is, what's our plan B? We don't land 9.9. What is the plan B based upon the concerns?
Everyone really want to jump in if there's other ones, but for me, interest is a significant one. We have to hopefully, in terms of the timing of CIP, we'll act on that. We think we've got that okay at the moment, but that's one we need to be as sure as we can on. Insurance is one as well that continues to be a challenge. By in a couple of weeks' time, whether that's in line with where we think it should be. And the other one for me is probably, no, it's not as large of a cost for us, but it's the gas one, because of the pressure around pricing for gas. So when we talked about decarbonisation before, I'll just jump in a little bit more on that one, is around, we've got, for example, some plant upgrades, and I think it's at the Live-In Aquatic Centre planned in the capital program. And so when we talk about decarbonisation, it's actually saying, let's swap us away from gas and move to electricity in terms of what we're doing for that space to power that. There could be also conversations about solar that hasn't been an active, so all those different options for us that are the cost of utilities in the future. That's another one as well, probably, that we need to do some work on to see whether it makes sense from a cost benefit, see the benefits on the other side. And as well with local waters, I think, and anything that happens with the Three Waters transition government, that funding, as we work into the workshops this afternoon, the cost of continuing to move forward and assess options is not something that's factored into our budget currently. And so as part of this annual plan, any conversations about how we fund that, whether it's reasonable because it's a strategic 30-year investment or it's a long-term conversation for the council, whether any funding that we might need might be a debt consideration rather than a rates consideration, that's probably another significant conversation.
I appreciate the comment around insurance, because that would be an absolute piece where I think we need to have some discussions about the risk and some cost savings. And the guess that solar, I'm guessing the next hour is going to be a discussion. Focusing on those levers where we can maximise return on investment over time to move us away from some of those costs.
We really appreciate all of your feedback, and we'll take that with us and continue our work on our budgets. One more from
I might just say, in terms of the conversations that we've had and where you wanted to, the conversation that you wanted to have around budgets, and the one, so we had the first one. Does this meet the mark for you in terms of what you were expecting, or give you the level of sort of cover or understanding of budgets that you need? We'll continue to go and work on options and come back to you as for the next stage, but probably for the December meeting, we'd be looking at a conversation around consulting or not. And so leading into that, knowing we'll have conversations about some of the points you mentioned, Councillor Grimstone, we've gotten to in terms of decreasing them. I just wanted to check in and see whether the conversation we had today meets those needs, or whether there's some other thinking that you might want as well.
For me, yes, I think it's useful. I think it's what ultimately useful is you told us that actually we're 6, not 9. I get that there are some TBC stuff, so that might change, but the fact that 2 X, Y, and Z at 9.9 is still achievable, gives some comfort.
Yeah, I loved it. I would have liked to see a kind of drill down some of those budgets beforehand, just for anyone to see. I know we could have asked for it, but I didn't need it, but I thought it would have, just for some of those questions, around like increased costs in the other expenses category. Fun to be able to figure those out ourselves beforehand.
Thank you all.
Yeah, it's materiality. Because if you look at the yeah, that was the original position, and once they moved them into the other it goes on to something like this. Yeah, that's why they made the change. Okay. Yeah.
So there's
Yeah, well, no, not to be honest. We need is a good think about the thinking behind this is the true thing.
right. Or it might even be later on, wait till the future development.
Track down page.
Depends on where those roads link up in stage 2 or 3 and stuff.
Yeah, I think the idea was sort of keeping it close like that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just someone who was a local that actually mentioned it. I had all right, cheers.
Was it? Wasn't it?
It's worked out.
Unfortunately,
Well,
I needed to get away for it, so I couldn't stay to the end, but did it carry on? Oh.
Probably was still quite short, probably had it, but the way it was.
Yeah, no, it's
Felt so.
Well, now that all it's tough, space of tension.
And even if I didn't respond,
Yeah.
it wasn't right.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you've got to see it. And we know that a few weeks ago, it was something.
I took a time to go and reach out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was, but
And of course,
Have a pizza.
No,
to do
no,
with
no,
it.
because
And I think it's because they felt uncomfortable and they disagree. Yeah, almost, it was like a deliberately forced eye contact. And one alternate there was the engineer.
Because that's yes. I know. I was looking at him too. It was good. I mean, it was
Good turnout. Yeah.
It was excellent to see that.
I did see Lee this morning.
But I just can't
Coming to pull you and then you add well, I think before you run the next one, we just put wings on the table.
Yeah.
And we need to show you the conversation. So, for issues,
You need to
you need to
escalate that. Outside.
Yeah.
keep you awake, I know. Yeah, it's about 2 o'clock for me sometimes. That's when I do it.
Sorry, let's get into it, eh? Cool, because we are running late. We've only got half an hour, have we?
Yeah. Sorry.
We'll go for it.
Cool, so Morena Koto, Jacinta Toko Ingoa. Today we're going to be talking about the Climate Action Plan. So the purpose of today's is to create an opportunity to and organisation feedback around the climate plan, presenting the work that's been done so far, around the feedback that's been received from elected members at previous council meetings, and also across the organisation feeding into we will be looking for guidance, feedback, and direction proposals, so please and happy to the workshop in that sense. In terms of the questions we're asking you today, we particularly want feedback around if you see that your previous feedback has been incorporated, particularly around those regional partnerships in this plan. I also want to see if you see any concerns within or opportunities within the actionable outcomes of the Climate Action Plan. So you'll see those about halfway through the draft Climate Action Plan. It's that table that we're going to work through. And then I also want to introduce around the inclusion of a Climate Action Fund. So that's separate to the fund that's been allocated through the long-term plan as a seed fund to activate community initiatives connected to the objective of. So yeah, we're in the triangle. So yeah, we want to get specific feedback direction. So today we're wanting to walk through the Climate Action Plan with you in terms of the theme of some of the previous work. So we have held 2 council workshops and 2 council reports in relation to the climate action work. But you'll note that these are related to climate change, regional partnerships, the carbon emissions forum, which we've spoken a little bit about today already, and also the establishment of additional budget to action this plan. Reflecting on the plan itself now, so the plan is a guide for Horowhenua District Council to work together with our community to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. The objective that's been worked into the plan is to inform climate actions to enable durable solutions to environmental change. The approach will be to ensure that Horowhenua District Council is prepared for climate challenges while also promoting an enriched environment. Plan, so this is the one that's just been through, so 2024-2044. You'll recall that Council approved a Climate Action Fund to action the Climate Action Plan, as well as an additional 50k for the carbon emissions development. And yeah, what David mentioned earlier, so that is just for the first year, not for all 3 years. So you'll see that in the following years, 2025 and 2026, the budget runs. Okay. is for focusing target initiatives to preserve and enhance Waipuni's natural environment. So promoting sustainability, waste management practices, and resilience to climate change for the benefit of current and future generations. The delivery of the climate action plan will be within budget allocations from that long-term plan. Cool. I'm just going to pause there if there's any questions or comments. Working forward, so you'll note that we're coming to council on Wednesday the 27th of November, so we will be presenting the options for council to discuss an action plan with the editorial amendments. The option that the action plan is not adopted back to council, or that the action plan is not adopted with no further work to be done. I just wanted to tease, so I'm moving quite quickly, just the tease the potential graphics for this plan. So the version that you guys have is in relation to the work, but this is a potential tease about what that action plan might look like when we come back to you. Cool. So just want to open the floor for any feedback, just walking through the plan now.
Just in terms of the potential options that the council can this plan not being adopted at all, we still have a budget line with no plan. Cool.
Spend it on something else.
Just checking.
Yeah, so in terms of the that was handed around to council prior to this meeting, so the options presented, if the option 3 were cancelled, then the budget required would no longer be required and would be.
Do you want questions on the actual action plan itself? So I was just wondering if you could give me an overview of like the kind of methodology for how we decided what's in the action plan and what's not, because one of the things we don't have in there is like a column in terms of prioritization, and so are these all like, do we start with a long list and then come to a short list, and that these have all got collective priority, or can you just talk sort of overview of methodology?
Yeah, so just talking about the actions themselves, so within the table. So in terms of the ones that went through, these have been grouped quite closely within council staff, as well as feedback from the elected members table. So you might recall that at a previous council workshop, that list was quite lengthy, that list was quite long, and there was a lot of around the ones that were in there. So it's been significantly reduced, but also clarified to be clear around the of those actions. In terms of the columns on the right of the table, they would dictate the potential opportunity to bring them in quickly, or if they are some time. And that will, I was hoping to get some feedback around today about I would be keen to do like 1, 2, 3, we'll do this first, second and third. That's a balancing act between the time that it will take to achieve the budget required, and then also the amount of resources to achieve that action. Just a comment as well about the categories of action. I just want to flag that we talked about those at the previous council workshop, and they were decided at that workshop to be pulled in, but if you see any red flags within those categories, let me know today so that we can work through those people that discuss in detail and get into the intricacies of those.
Kia ora, guys. Only just a couple of comments. One, I think you've done a great job. Feedback that I'd given in the past, and I can see it. I always sort of remind us, for me, I'm a visual type of person, so there's a lot of words in there. It's really awesome to present things in another way as well as, so when you talk about green belts, recreational spaces, I actually like to see them visually so I can understand how they sit and how they do or don't around yet. We're in the process of protecting those that I was thinking about how does this piece relate that's currently in the organisation. Are we actually being consistent in our messaging? I know it's a lot of principles in that, but is it actually binding operationally? It's one thing to put words on paper, but are we living it? So like that, yeah. But I'm a visual guy, so sometimes I like to understand this, and I think math programs work for some of us, for all, and I know it's a lot more work, but that's how I like to look at myself. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I've just been reflecting on this because similar to I think what we did with Housing Action Plan and Town Centre Plan, is the next step like an implementation plan? So we have this as kind of high level articulation of the high level actions, so that then there's an implementation plan that gets into some specifics about costing, timing, sequencing, that kind of thing. Because like we were just talking in the previous session where someone talked about to reduce gas costs, we might look at solar on a roof, and if there's, you wouldn't want to see that as a specific action in here, but you might, as part of an implementation plan, go, okay, well, this has a climate purpose, but it also has a broader purpose in terms of efficiency, cost reduction, whatever. So is that what's intended? Is that there'd be an implementation plan that slides in behind this?
Yes, so that's been a discussion around the executive leadership table as well. So we have so following if the action plan is approved by the council decision, then we will be moving on to the next phase, which is the implementation plan. The implementation will be directed by the values within budget as well.
Sorry, snuck in before you, Mark. In terms of plans on plans, I do like plans because they get things done, but I also like things. That implementational plan, that sits more at an operational level. That's not something that I imagine, unless we express a huge desire to. But given it's 100, it's not going to be doing much. We should probably figuring out how to drive it. But I just wondered what the kind of where that's at.
So my understanding is that operational, so this will work in the background, pulling it. We can all appreciate that climate change sits across the organisation, so there's lots of figures in the background that come in. The implementation plan will be within offices and we will be up for feedback.
So for clarity, the implementation plan, funding for that, the budget for the action plan.
Thank you. Just and you guys have taken on. I think you've meant it and it's presented. For me, I'm a bit visual, but I want to feel like I want traffic time frames, the impacts, and the estimated costs. So from a visual perspective, wonder whether picking up on Sam's point around as usual stuff, so that actually is already a focus or already happening versus something else we're going to need to introduce or process the level of officer investment on each of them. Shape or form. I think that would be helpful. But thank you. Good work.
You just raised is probably what was driving my thinking about the implementation plan, because a number of these actions kind of reflect things we're doing already. Like you look under the transport strategy, the sustainable network, it talks about shared pathways, we're already doing that. It talks about advocacy for public transport, we're already doing that. And so rather than this document having the traffic light, I'm envisioning that the implementation plan has it, because if you map it against these actions, there's some stuff where we're already going, and some of these actions will also require a new action or a new work stream. But the majority of these already have tentacles into the organisation in terms of what we're already doing, right? Yeah. So I think the implementation plan is probably, because that can then be reported through into the OPR in terms of like how are we tracking against what we said we were going to do implementation wise. But that's just mine.
Yeah, so just on the tracking and monitoring as well, you'll see within the document that was sent out that the monitoring will be so we will be reporting back to you on the progress of those actions through that means.
Awesome. Yeah. I'd be interested in that. In terms of potentially identifying which of these aligners quick wins or not. The traffic light system speaks a little bit about that. Short, small, and low are a pretty quick win, but maybe some weighting of benefit. As well as potentially one of these actions are perpetual actions. I mean, that's great, but single capital investment. I do have a broader thought, maybe more for the table than for you, about investments that we make through this fund, which is reducing power usage. If there's a tangible return on investment on these, should this be a saving to the ratepayer? Definitely. Should some of it be returned to the investment that was taken? Say we put $100,000 of solar panel on poles. If it saves $200,000 over the next 2 years, it's not going to. Should there be a feedback money was originally taken from, so that it could, as opposed to being enough we've spent the climate, it's gone.
Appreciation.
What Rogan raised is an interesting thing, right? Because as a council, we harmonise everything, basically. I mean, there's some small exceptions, but this came up in the previous one around town centre, commercial property, reviewing whether it should be ring fenced. There could be arguments around parking meter revenue. And so we kind of need to take a principled approach to it, because, yeah, I think there's... So maybe it's not a discussion. Maybe it's a discussion that needs to happen in future around across activities rather than being specific. But yeah, I mean, there is a good argument to say that if you can demonstrate that return on investment, then you would want to reinvest that into making further operational savings and gains. But there does have to come an endpoint, otherwise you're not actually saving anything. You're just recycling. Yeah.
Might be a dumb question. Like Sam said, already doing like dunes and stuff like that. Could you give me a live example of the last bullet point on page 7, reduce inequalities of climate impact?
A live example that today could be achieved through the plan.
yeah, like what's occurring today that you would deem an inequality, and potentially what you'd do to address it and reduce that.
So, for example, when we talk about reducing inequalities of climate impacts, we're talking about some of those maybe isolated communities that would be more impacted by the likes of climate change. And so when we talk about it in a broad sense, it's about ensuring that equitable outcomes are achieved for the wider community as a whole. So not increasing impacts of certain communities, but supporting other ones in other means. Probably.
So I guess an example would be that land that is more at risk from climate change, for example, would often be land that comes with a lower value, and people that live in those locations might be less able to withstand the impacts of climate change. They might not have the socioeconomic means to prepare, respond, and recover if they become if they are exposed to those hazard events, like a flood, for example. So in adapting to climate change, an option is to consider how we focus action and attention so that we can reduce the unequal impact of climate hazards by, say, focusing attention in the areas that are both most at risk, but also the areas where people are less able to bounce back after having been exposed to the hazard.
So, thinking about that, or following on from that example, if I was a resident viral, for example, we're like lower socio-economic, high risk of flooding, reflooding, that would demonstrate that inequality.
So a live example might that be Waikawa Beach erosion for some property can't afford to do X? How might
Hypothesize one in a catastrophic way, as I do. Some beach suburb we have has a rich part of town and a really poor part of town, and both are equally exposed to a climate risk. Who live in the poor part of town can't afford insurance, and but it's a pretty big deal. The people who live in the rich part of town can afford insurance. Get flooded, it is slightly less because they have insurance. When we are prioritising where to spend our limited money to do some kind of mitigation, we might start on the poor side of it because it's going to hurt them more. That would be a way we could address inequality. Vaguely accurate and kind of gives you a real world scenario might actually impact someone.
Yeah, it's funny because that's a good example, because I was thinking the same thing. The document is we don't have a process on how to describing and that when does actually give us that determine what the priority is. Money. Parties. How do we reflect that in here? Sort of encapsulate that we have to look to the most. Wanted to just leave it.
I may have missed it, but is there actually, or do we have an actual example in real terms of return of investment, the money we spend on those things with the breakdown? Or is it all just rainbows, fairy dust, and wishful thinking?
So the work within the climate action plan, particularly the actions that have been signalled, so lots of those are identified as mitigation and adaptive. So doing those protects you for the future impacts. What we're talking about in the climate action plan is navigating our hazards, navigating weather changes, navigating those potential threats that are both to support investment, small
but we don't actually know what those impacts might be, so it's kind of crystal ball gazing. It's not based on real thing. Just science. Or you follow the science.
Just one thing, just reflecting on this conversation about, because one of the things you talk about, Justin, in other contexts is that whole sentiment of if you choose to live somewhere that's at higher risk, then you shouldn't expect, like we talked about that. And so how do we build, because I'm comfortable with that bullet and how it's framed, but there also needs to be a flip side to that, which is that if a person chooses to live in a higher risk or accept a higher level of risk, then council's not going to play a greater role because of your decision. So there kind of needs to be a balancing component to this, because we all make decisions about where we choose to where we live and different insurance, no insurance, all that kind of stuff. And so there kind of needs to be, I don't know if we can do that in terms of wording, but I think that's just the flip side. So just to balance it, to make it clear that yes, that might be a goal, but there's also an expectation that people are responsible and accountable for their own decisions and own actions.
Yeah, I don't know if the plan will ever capture them, make that assessment. There is the question of because that's the only place they can afford to live, and inequality, as opposed to it's not a choice if it is the only place, because they cannot afford to live in all other gentrified. But yes, I think clearly when that scenario comes 10, 15 years in the future, the table that are here at the time will probably have shinier words on a page and make better decisions. Yeah, I don't know if we should super debate that one point, but there is a lot of nuance to it.
So I think where things are sitting right now is there was obviously work done on a climate action plan. Climate action plan contains guiding values, guiding principles, and actions. If the table were to adopt the climate action plan with those set of actions, those sets of principles, those sets of values, the next steps would be for officers to operationalise that plan, being guided by the values and the principles that are articulated in the climate action plan. Alternatively, the table have the option of either directing further work on the values, the principles, the actions, etc., or choosing not to do any further work in the climate space.
Sounds good. Thank you. Progress. Cheers. Thank you. Got 5 minutes, team, before we start at 2. our three waters or local water done well services, and welcome Dougal list to everybody. This is Dougal's been running as the consultant that has prepared all the Wellington regional service delivery plan, and so has presented at all the meetings that we've been to with the advisory group in Wellington. So he is today giving us Horowhenua version of the Wellington Services Delivery Plan. So welcome, Dougal. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Bernie, and kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come along and speak with you today. I've got a few slides to run through. I'm happy to take questions and hold them to the end. It's about 24 minutes to walk through the presentation, and what I'm really here to do today is give you an overview of the recommended regional response to and what it's like. And I know you've got a few other options before you as well. So hopefully this helps to inform you to respond. So what I was going to cover briefly, I made a lot of information before, as well as the legislative requirements, how the process to the elements of the model, including governance and accountability, how the model responds to financial sustainability tests, the benefits of the model, and implementation and next steps should you head down this path of a joint regional. Just firstly on legislation, so I know you're aware of this, the government is in the process of passing three pieces of legislation. The first, essentially, the phase through this policy framework. The second bill, which is passed into law now, the Local Government Water Services Preliminary Arrangements Act, requires that all councils must develop a water services delivery plan by September next year. So this is a non-negotiable. You must develop a water services delivery plan, but you have some options in terms of how you can develop it. You can develop one of these plans alone as a council, or with other councils jointly. As part of that plan, you've got some options in terms of your proposed delivery model. So whether you remain an in-house led delivery model like you've got at the moment, joint delivery arrangements such as Wellington Water, or an asset owning arrangement such as we're proposing. The Act brings in some further information around and economic regulation arrangements that will be the accountability of the Commerce Commission. So I think really important that must do the Water Services Plan, and there is no status quo. Things are changing. More regulation and oversight of council investment in relation to water. Focus from the Commerce Commission on quality. So regardless of which option you choose, we are and a lot of those details will be confirmed December this year, which will set out some of the enduring framework, including a new type of CTO model and the powers and functions of the Commerce Commission in relation to economic regulation. So knowing that this was coming, the signalled pretty clearly like coming. There was some really good regional leadership shown across the region by mayors to work together and get ahead of the game essentially. So we've got about a 6-month head start on many parts of the country in terms of thinking about how do we respond to local water done well. So knowing that this was coming, in a process taken around May to legislative requirements of local water done well. As a region, what's important to us, what's our key requirements, what does success look like? Understand the drivers changing, investment is required to meet compliance requirements, enable growth, clean, etc. Look at the different delivery model options, think about governance and accountability arrangements, think about financial sustainability, think about implementation. So we've had quite a lot of work going underway. So this has been built on the trust, the advisory oversight group, Bernie, CEs, across the region, and series of workshops to same as what you might think is best for Whenua, but this is the model that we think is good as part of the region. What's the best response? The advisory oversight group has set the goal of ensuring the delivery of safe, reliable, environmentally and financially sustainable water services so the region can be resilient, restore to wide, and enable new homes and the well-being of communities. I just wanted to hit on that point because I think what it's done is to try and pick up the minimum requirements of the government, particularly around financial sustainability and meeting compliance requirements, as well as many of the outcomes that are really important to you and your communities, including clean water, te mana o te wai. The process that we've worked through has been collaborative and non-binding. This process, and we've worked with the oversight group, which has had 4 representatives from across the regional area. Joint project team. Early in the process, we asked the process, what's really important to you to understand, how do we make sure we're designing a response which meets your needs and the needs of our community and partners and other stakeholders. So from a consumer or a public perspective, public ownership is one that's being regulated in government legislation as well. It needs to be affordable, it needs good local service delivery. Came through as things. Other governments, te mana o te wai. And sorry, when I refer to iwi, I also refer to iwi, hapu, marae partners, those appropriate relationships that councils hold with their mana whenua partners, just to clarify that. So te mana o te wai is really important, meaningful influence in terms of governance and investment, and that treaty obligations must be honoured. Councils really looking for that financial sustainability, the ability to provide that local influence, like growth planning and other outcomes that clarity of accountabilities, and service again come through is really important. The government has set a set of minimum requirements moving forward, particularly around financial sustainability and meeting compliance requirements and enabling growth. So those are again bottom line through the government. And the future entity, if we're going to be successful, we have a lot of lessons that we've learned from other delivery models across the region, including Wellington Water. And what we know from that is a future entity needs to be empowered, it needs to have a professional skills-based board, and it needs to have the ability to meet the new regulatory requirements. So you've got to set it up right to be successful from the start. In terms of looking at the need for change, you'll be well aware of the level of investment that is required across the region, and this is something that's built up over a period of decades where it's been a challenge for councils to fully fund the cost of water through rates. So all councils do face key issues, and I know that some councils are more in the paper than others, but all of our councils across the region do face significant issues. They're similar but different. Most councils have significant issues with their network, better condition networks, but all councils have some form of investment required beyond generally what you can achieve through rates and current borrowing levels. So transformational change is required. These are some kind of examples. That's worn out. We've got many parts of the region where growth is being constrained. There's a lot of capacity to make that growth and meet service requirements. In the metropolitan area, we've got risks of some drinking water shortage. Those risks are greater in other parts of the region as climate change kicks in as well. So we do need to build in that seismic network and resilience, and the workforce to deliver on the work that's needed will need to work in the sector and ensure that how they do the work is done as we slowly raise the costs of water so that's done in a more affordable way for all our communities. Just to touch on the issue of regional network condition, if you liken it to a car, network, and this is on an averages basis, and just to provide a bit more detail on the network, it's a bit like when you have a car which is newer or a better condition, and running a it's not too bad. It's kind of understood. If our water network was a car, it's a little bit older, it's a little bit run down, it's got 3 tyres which need to be replaced, a flat tyre that's cracked, rust spots. So, you know, it costs a lot more to run a car in no condition, and therefore it costs a lot more to run a network, water network. So one of the things we need to do as the region is compliance issues, safe, clean water. But we need to address some of those, that backlog of investments, so the renewals which are once you get the network back, the costs of running it come back down. In response to those challenges and issues, we looked at a number of different delivery models. DIA has put out some further guidance around different delivery models and options, and this aligned really well with the options that we were looking at. In-house models, as I say, 4 of the councils across the region currently have an in-house model. Service delivery option, water, full breadth asset owning model. Best response to those key requirements from councils was the asset owning CTO. So there's a need to be which can provide end-to-end accountability. Just coming on to that recommended model, we think this is the best for region model. So it would be a joint council-owned company, so you'd be owners and shareholders in a company, which is the full breadth free water utility, which would be vested in the ownership of all those water assets, and would also have the revenues transferred, and also the debt and liabilities transferred as well, so have that full accountability. It's a model that's well aligned with government legislative requirements, which is going to respond to the new operating environment through the ability to focus on assurance, quality, delivery, providing that local service to customers. And so that's come through really key issue, particularly Kapiti Horowhenua, and know that a model which spans that region service to our people. And, this is one of the details that we need to continue to work through. Trying to get this key principle, but organisation, how you make sure it's got the right organisation structure, how you make sure it's got the right depots and the right people in the right places and the right contract models, all that kind of detail that was this kind of framework to give you that assurance. And thereby you're getting good compliance, response times and supply surety. The model has to be financially sustainable by 2028. Come back to that. Critical to that is significant long-term debt, and as one of the new water organisations, they'll have access to the new LGA which are higher than what councils currently have. So councils are a range of other options I know before you as well. Compare and contrast this. Just to talk through a few of the key elements of the model. So it's a publicly owned company through shareholding councils, and those shareholding rights would be confirmed through a constitution and shareholding agreement, with all the assets, revenue, liabilities transferred to the new organisation. In terms of governance, it needs to be empowered to operate independently and with the ability to prioritise investment, and the shareholders would have a degree of oversight of that through the appointment of board members, which would be a skills-based board. So just reiterating, it's not a representative board that we're proposing, and it's something that will be required by the EGFA legislation as well. So there wouldn't be a Wellington rep or a Horowhenua rep or a Wairarapa rep or an iwi rep. There would be a skills-based board that had an appropriate mix of skills and competencies that give you confidence that they can do the job. So it's a group of shareholders. You will decide on how you work the board and you make appointments and hold them to account. So it's not a representative board, just want to stress that point. It's a skills-based board. Skills and competencies to do the job.
I just wanted to ask, that was a really good point of clarity for me. And I know it's not representational, but do they get to have a say in this appointment?
So that point did come up at the advisory oversight group. What was discussed, and this is a detail constitution shareholding agreement, is shareholders will need to have a shareholding committee of some shape or form to write the statement of expectations and appoint board members as part of that shareholding arrangement. Māori partners, so there would need to be some kind of representation on that group, some kind of representation on the board appointments process. The details of that have not yet been defined, but it's a principle. So some of those other skills, you need a board with commercial skills, asset management skills, te ao Māori, networking ability, customer knowledge, and local government competencies. In terms of really important that treaty white obligations are a meaningful governance role confirmed through the Constitution. And one of the things we've talked about is that the organisation needed a range of enduring relationships, both with councils and within the governance level through a management operational level. In a similar way that you have as a council, you work and have a relationship at a number of different levels, reflecting governance through operations and delivery throughout. In terms of the customer, a really important point is the key relationship of the customer. So they bill the customer, they provide services direct to the customer. If there's a problem, the customer calls them, not the council. They're accountable to the customer, and that's an important regulation. It's not just pricing, quality, it's also consumer protection. So the relationship of the new organisation to the customer is really, really important. And so the customer doesn't have a relationship with the board of the council, that relationship shifts to the new organisation. So important point there. And those interests, as I say, are supported through the new economic regulation to make sure that it's, that the organisation is quality and the right price service. In terms of the strategy of the organisation, shareholders set a statement of expectations, and the organisation needs to respond to that through what's called a water services strategy. So the water services delivery plan is a one-off transitional document, and basically the next thing that the organisation needs to produce is a water services strategy, which sets out its investment pricing response to the shareholding expectations, and they'll have annual reporting expectations as well. So all that sets up quite a bit of the accountability framework, which will be clarified and through Bill 3, including the statutory purpose of these new organisations. And so we have that annual reporting, the oversight from all three regulators, the regional council in terms of environment, quality, ComCom in terms of consumer protection, price, and in terms of quality. So that really provides that clarity of accountability. It's held to account by the regulators, which means the council has quite a different role as shareholders too. And lastly, borrowing. So borrowing would be via the LGFA based on debt covenants, which around said to be around about 5%, so higher than what council borrowing limits are. And we need to have a real clear focus on efficiency. Every percentage point of efficiency we get in the organisation is critical when we're talking about billions of dollars over 20, 30 years. So that's the model. Just moving on to financial sustainability. The policy is quite strongly framed around this financial sustainability concept. And so whether you're a council independently, two model, or Wellington regional model, the same tests will basically apply. And there will be a requirement to demonstrate how you meet these three tests. So investment sufficiency. Have you got enough investment plan to meet your compliance and growth and level of service required? So prove that you're investing enough. You've got to focus on this. And then also prove that you've got enough revenue coming from costs and you've got enough financing to manage those costs. So the three work off one another effectively. In terms of investment sufficiency, this is really the area we've done the most work to date is to try and understand what's the scale of investment that's required across the regional area over the next 25 years. So meets those level of service requirements, enables regulatory requirements and growth. And we're trying to frame it up in these kind of broad buckets of investment. One is the keep up with network maintenance. So this is your basic maintenance renewals program to make sure that it stays in good condition and doesn't deteriorate. But on top of that, for most of our councils, we're dealing with a situation that's already worn out, and so we need to catch up. We need to fix that part of the network through renewals, and that gets the network into a more sustainable, lower cost state over time. On top of that, enabling growth, and there's a differential between what's collected through DCs or financial contributions and what it costs to growth to the network, as well as responding to the need for compliance and cleaning up some of those stormwater and wastewater issues across the region and its faults as well. So when this is done on the basis of modelling and estimates across the region, but it gives us a picture of the level of investment required, which will be somewhere in the order of 15 to 17 billion, which means about $700 to $750 million of investment a year. So it's a bit more than what's currently planned and what happens across the region, and so that will need to gradually build up over time. To meet that challenge, we'll need to carefully balance price and borrow. This is the area we really need to do. There's a couple of kind of key takeaways. Currently, on average across the region, people just aren't being charged the full costs of services. So when you add up all the costs of maintaining, running a wooden across the region, and that's a factor of constraints on local government. And so to get what people pay to the cost of running and maintaining a network will take time to make sure that it's more affordable as we can make it, and we need to carefully balance price increases with the use of finance to make sure that that's as affordable as possible. That has to be done in the context of the economic regulator to make sure that there is that focus on pricing quality, and that this is done which is fair and reasonable. A key principle which I do want to kind of just really reiterate today is we are proposing a key principle that costs are based on cost. Price is based on cost to serve. So if the cost of services in the Hora Whenua costs X and it costs Y in another part of the region, you're not paying Y, you're paying X. This has been a really important point. It's given other councils some comfort. We've done it, we've just been back and double checked this with DIA. There is no requirement to harmonise prices across a regional area, so there is no requirement to say we're all going to pay the same, so you'll be subsidising someone else's problem. We do have about 200 different price points across the region though. As a council you have different ways of charging people for water, all councils do, so we need to have some degree of harmonisation. Regulator put in place a principle where price is based on cost to serve. So if the costs here are X, it's reasonable, so the regulator, that's what you will be charged, not what it costs in another part of the region. That cross-subsidisation, harmonisation across the region.
Is that principle likely to extend to capital costs associated with development contributions? So growth infrastructure, so same cost to establish, or is that principle likely to apply equally? Yep.
So some of the issues that we're dealing with here are these are principles that we're looking to put in place in the new model, and as shareholders you need to hold the new entity into account forward, because future decisions will be made by a new entity to account of these principles over time will be an important consideration for councils.
Sorry, Dougal, just raises the point around if there's no harmonisation and different parts of the region are doing cost X, if you like, there is a sustainability financial for that part of the region, but then other parts of the region may not be financially sustainable. How does that impact on the whole region's delivery?
I think one way I look at it is investment tends to come in waves. So if I pick on Kapiti, they don't have the same level of investment as some other parts of the region over the next 10 years, but 10 years, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, their investment tends to ramp up. So costs tend to go up and down. Hunt Valley's dealing with Avalon, Nainai, Taita, all being built about the same amount of time. So they've got a bit of a wave of AC pipes all starting to wear out at the same point. So that will be part of the balance thing. So the organisation will need to provide some degree of harmonisation across pricing, but it's a key principle that we intend to work through in the next phase of work, just to kind of really try and make that clear.
Sorry, just to expand on that. So just to expand on that, so the cost to serve, so that would include the borrowing cost. Like, would there be identification of, like, segregation of borrowing cost from opening debt and then also accumulated debt? Like, is there the harmonisation of borrowing costs?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there's a number of factors that obviously underpin cost. There's what people currently pay. That varies quite a bit across the region, but average prices per household. Some councils are significantly less than that, some are more. There's little borrowing existing. There's little borrowing that we anticipate when the new organisation is stood up. And there's also asset condition. So all of those factors will need to be figured in. So I can't give you a 100% straight answer, but it's an example of the types of issues that a new organisation will need to grapple with to provide fairness. And what I can say is it'll be doing this in the context of an economic regulator saying, prove to me that that's fair, prove to me that is what it costs to provide the services there. So again, that's where you have some degree of assurance on future arrangements, while some of these decisions will be made by a future organisation or a future board. The government is putting in place economic regulation which will have that oversight to test and provide price quality and consumer protection obligations. On that debt point, we're expecting LGFA as the key borrower, and as part of the models, councils will be provided to provide a guarantee or uncalled capital for the debt, and the water services organisation will inherit quite significant debt associated with water assets as part of its establishment.
Just comment on so if harmonisation or subsidisation is not a principle that sits within this regional model, could you just put that into real terms? So, like, if you're in Wellington City or the Hut versus your family, the difference between the price that you're paying to receive a service, which, like, I'm just intrigued to think about some of the genesis of the Waters reform. It's about affordability, and so what is that difference in affordability between communities if harmonisation is not this?
So harmonisation was a key principle for 3 water reform under Labour. Effectively, it was a way of trying to make sure that some of the communities that they wouldn't be able to afford their big future bills would from other communities. That's the principle of local water done well. So local water done well enables local solutions, and this with DIA. There's no requirement. The new organisation will inherit quite a number of different ways of pricing for water, so we'll need to do some degree of harmonisation just to simplify those arrangements. There are differentials between how people are priced for water, and we're proposing that those would be locked in for a 3-year period. And then we're proposing that keep pricing forward is that price will be based on the cost of service. So how it's said that working in practice is that the entity would need to work out within a reasonable geographic catchment area that it can manage from a pricing perspective. What's it cost to provide the water service in the area? And therefore, what does that mean for price? Is that different to another part? So maybe they approach that from a district-wide level, or even within say, north half of Livin, depending on the services and the cost to provide those services. That was the kind of details that a new organisation would need. One of the opportunities of this organisation is to leverage its balance sheet to address the ups and downs. And I think this is why it's really important to take a 30-year view of investment requirements. Because over the ups and downs of investment, there will be periods where it costs less to provide water services because you're in a steady state. And then, like all of the councils, there's a year 11 project, which is 11 because it's a big lump. So you need the ability to sort of
Sorry, Dougal. And in my mind, the Wellington part of the region has got some real challenges in terms of that catch-up to be financially sustainable and to also make it affordable. It doesn't seem, that seems totally contradictory to me in terms of the ability to be able to actually do that. And who is I know the economic regulator, somewhere along the line though, someone's got to make a subjective appraisal of whether that is, in fact, what they're doing is correct. And if one part of the region is not sustainable, then how does, my worry is concerned the impact that has on the rest of the region.
Look, I think it's the kind of issue that a new organisation would need to grapple with, but that's what we intend to do in terms of the next ways of work, is to get a better understanding of the investment program that would be required for both price and for financing. You'll need a consultation process, whichever model you go into. You've got to show the financial impacts on council. People will know what it costs me as well. So you can understand a more robust view of the program and its affordability and what that means.
Just really quickly, with the 100% ceiling on capital-wise, I guess they have got that put it over 30 years to enable some of that development, though, is that correct? But, yeah.
CCOs do, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So that you at least should have that ability to finance it. But,
we think there's a number of key benefits. Models say it's well aligned with government requirements. We think it's really well aligned with what the councils have said is important to you and business stakeholders. Would maintain that public ownership with clarified governance and accountability. It'd have the access to the additional funding to invest over time. The level of investment would replace a lot of the network in a 20-year period, so you'd get the network into additional term and have the ability to pay resilience, etc. The scale is really important in terms of enabling efficiency, or every percentage point of efficiency. Value for money and doing things efficiently. Really, I think that the other opportunity is an asset owning CCO scale that provides that opportunity of stewardship of the assets in the long term. We're talking about assets which have generally a 75 plus year lifespan, and that's the kind of view we need as an organisation to be having. It's the kind of opportunity where you really drive your efficiency gains because you make strategic long-term decisions focused around the water network. An example that we've been looking at is we've got a which has got some significant compliance issues under the current settings. Council's kind of chasing fix up and maintaining its current state and trying to stay ahead of the compliance challenges, but the reality is it's on location and compliance will be really hard to meet there. We need a view, a long-term planning investment approach where we're thinking over the next 50 years, where does that treatment plant need to be? Therefore, how do we connect resilient to climate change, to earthquakes, environmental change in thinking that really drives efficiency gains over time. Development of a water services plan and implementation plan. The next steps, the water services plan says it's pretty well set out in legislation, information disclosure, which says what's the level of investment that you need to make, how you fund that through price and debt to meet regulatory requirements, and what's your delivery model in terms of how you're going to respond to that, and you've got a range of delivery model options. So that applies to all councils. But in terms of the implementation plan, the regional model that we're contemplating is a big, complex organisation, so councils will need a lot of assurance that this is being set up right, that you've got clarity of governance and shareholding rights, understanding ownership, entry and exit rights, and some councils saying, very well within saying, we might exit after 5 years. Councils asking the question, could we enter at a later stage? And other councils saying, well, we're not sure to enter within the first 5 years. You need the operating model, organisation design, delivering local services. We've got a number of strategies to sort out around debt, asset transfer, people transition, etc. The IT requirements drive a lot of our costs. I envelope for those because there's a number of different ways to approach that and the timing of that, as well as legal requirements process. So those are the things that the implementation plan will deal with in addition to the legal requirements of the water services plan. As part of that, we've got a few detailed issues that we're working through. So the timing of consultation and LTP processes for those that have to go through that. Stormwater, we're doing some further thinking around stormwater. We're working with the LGFA to think about the transfer process and looking at the transfer. So we're still waiting on Bill 3, which will land in December. Some more detail, we don't expect any curveballs from that, but we just don't have that detail yet. And at the heart of this are our people. So we really need to be thinking about people and change process, both for council staff, but also our supply chain contractors and suppliers. So the timeline that we're looking at, as a council, you'll be looking at this as well in terms of your dates. By the end of the year, we really need to know which councils are part of the process, so we can start developing a water services plan for those councils. That we can get to a consultation point, so probably March, consultation point. Councils need to consider the implications for your council and when and how you need to amend your LTP. Councils have to formally adopt the services plan, CEs have to certify the services plan, and then that is submitted to the 3rd of September next year. So you take it to Christmas, we've got about 9 months to go. So a bit of work ahead. Those are my slides.
The strategy, sorry, I've forgotten the full name that you called it, that the new entity would have to develop. Does that get developed pre-establishment of the entity? Because there's going to have to be a transitional phase, and that because that's going to have a lot of important detail. And so at what point does that's going to be a responsibility of the new entity. So that's going to come after all of this decision making. Sorry, I'm just playing this out in my head as the sequencing.
Yeah, that's why the water services delivery plan is quite important, because it's a kind of a precursor to the water services strategy, so it needs to set out what's the investment and the timing of that, I mean, for price and debt, how we're going to deliver this.
Yeah, so it's going to happen. Yeah.
And you have to give effect to your water services delivery plan, so once you develop it, it's signed off. So that'll give the new organisation, as it gets up and running, direction to get underway. I can't confirm exactly when the first water services strategy will be.
Dougal, one of the concerns around our community, I suppose, is the site that they have of that delivery. At the moment, they've got 13 people around the table here who represent their views and can quickly see if that delivery has been managed properly. And now we're going to have a shareholding body where there'll only be one possibly representative of the people around this table sitting on that who will then sort of try to make the board accountable in terms of what is going on. Is there a sense from other parts of the region in terms of how that is, they're used to that sort of stuff, and I think we are to a lesser scale, but just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's quite a big jump. It's quite a big change, because it goes from, as you say, the performance of this new organisation isn't really your accountability anymore. It's the accountability of the board. The board, need to be the right people that can drive the performance through the management team, through the local service delivery model, and there'll be 3 regulators who will be crawling over its performance as well. So it is quite a different role. The reality is, in this new world, your ability to kind of directly influence day-to-day operations of a water service organisation is not really the council's role. You'll have a range of relationships from being a shareholder. You'll work really closely with them around alignment of growth planning and roading and parks and stormwater management. So there'll be a whole range of relationships where you will influence them. But ultimately, their relationship is directly with the customer. So if the customer's got a problem, they should go to the water organisation, not to you. Yeah, it's quite a change.
So that is an interesting point, Dougal. It's one of the concerns I've seen and ran right through this whole debate, way back, is sort of local influence and the ability for us as elected members, because people will still come to us no matter what, to be able to get or advocate for solutions at the local level, and some things that can be relatively minor in the scheme of things, but not minor to the people it's affecting. And I think it's still a concern. Is there? Can you provide any comfort in that space in terms of something this large?
It's one of those details that we need to continue to work through to make sure that there is that clarity of how you provide influence. So the accountability framework is part of it. Statement of expectation, board appointments gives you some degree of confidence. The organisational design, I think, is really important as well. Who's your local contact? I've previously worked at Waka Kotahi, so I'm going to use them as perhaps an example, which may not be. Waka Kotahi shifted from a model where there was a clear local state highway manager to a national kind of structure, and it changed relationships. So how do we learn from that? How do we make sure that if there is an organisation who's accountable for water management in Horowhenua, you know who to call, and that you've got a relationship with them, and that they've got a depot locally, and they've got people who can respond to that issue. So that's the kind of response I think that we need to really build into the next phase. Scale to enable benefits of scale, local delivery, local service to provide local relationships, and confidence that you'll get the response. And I think that's the sweet spot to work through.
I think the thing for me, Dougal, is you don't see those words reflected in here, though. So is that some words that we need to encourage? Yeah.
Dougal, also the risk of, I mean, we're likely to see quite a number of CCOs across the country, aren't we? And, I think there is a risk that we haven't got the capacity or the capability to be able to appoint the right people to the boards of all these CCOs, because we're only a small country. We're small, depending on where we land, we might be joining 1, 2 or more councils, and to try and build a board in that sort of landscape might be extremely difficult. If we're all competing, we might be competing. Does the board members say we could pinch board members from the Wellington region as well and put them on our board? Does that mean we can? I assume we can do that, can we?
Yeah, I think I've been involved in a couple of governance processes recently, and it is, we are still a relatively small region as a whole, so sometimes it's hard to find people with the right skills who have the right relationships and aren't conflicted for various reasons and have capacity to do the work. So I think it would be really important to look beyond our region, as well as making sure there's local knowledge and local relationships as part of that board. So I think, again, there's that sweet spot to find there. Quite a few councils are, you're one of the, I'd say, luckier councils in terms of having a number of choices before you. From what we can see across the country, quite a few councils aren't in a position to go down a CCO or a joint CCO option, dance partners as we call them. So I think, in terms of where we're at as a Wellington regional model, we are at the forefront of a bigger joint model. How many others will be set up, I'm not sure. I think probably the more issue for the New Zealanders delivery capacity, and how we give the water sector enough confidence to invest in people and plant and machinery to do more work over time.
This is kind of a real basic question, but so under this new system, people no longer get a bill for water from the council, they'll get it from the CCO, just like we get a bill for power from Contact Meridian or whatever. So we're not rating for water at all anymore and passing it on. They bill directly for the water.
Yeah.
So that means people that provide their own water don't get a bill because there's no service. Okay.
The potential exemption is around stormwater, so we're still working through some of the details. The guidance is a bit unclear in this space, so I'm kind of asking a few questions in DIA, but it does allow councils to transfer stormwater assets and for the new entity to charge for stormwater, and that's our proposed model for piped urban networks. So there are places on the periphery of towns and cities where people may not receive drinking water or wastewater services, but they may have some degree of benefit from the stormwater or floodwater management that councils provide. So they might get you'll still be accountable for overland flow paths. So as part of a rates bill, you might still charge people for some stormwater provision. It's feasible. So Horizons still has that role as flood management, so there's no change there. So the new entity and councils will continue to need to work with regional councils around floodwater management.
It appears it. Dougal. Thank you very much. Look, really appreciate you making the effort to come up and talk to us. As you say, we're a bit fortunate in terms of having lots of cards to play with in terms of this doesn't make it any easier, but it certainly does. But I just want to acknowledge the work that you've done in terms of making it a heck of a lot easier for us. In terms, all the information and data that you provided is certainly very comprehensive, and look, it will make our decision a lot easier in the long run. But yeah, really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming. Cheers. like to introduce to you Catherine Stewart. She's the transition water person from Whanganui, who has worked with all the transition managers around the Horizons region, but Catherine is pretty much leading that work. Really appreciate you coming down, Catherine. Thank you very much, and look forward, after we've just seen the Wellington stuff, to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bernie, and tēnā koutou everyone, ko Catherine Stewart tōku ingoa. As Mayor Bernie said, I'm the Three Waters Transition Manager for Wanganui District Council. That's my primary job, but also for the last 8 or 9 months, I've been lucky enough to be leading a team of the transition managers from each council in the Manawatu Wanganui region to look at what our options might be to respond to the government's local water done well policy at a regional level. So I've been lucky enough to be working with Catherine here and our equivalents at the other 5 councils. So I will primarily be wearing that sort of regional hat today, but if I stray into anything that sounds a bit odd, it might simply be that I've slipped into Wanganui custom and practice, so please do ask any questions as we go through or seek clarification. My intention today is to provide you with a little bit of background about the project and the context of the region and our water situation, and then present the high-level findings of that work, and then talk a little bit about the work that we have been doing in the last couple of months, and that is our focus for the next sort of 6 weeks, to be honest. So, the Regional Appraisal Project has been overseen by a CE steering group, so the chief executives of all 7 councils, and then our progress has been reported to the Mayoral Forum, and they've given some sort of high-level strategic direction around that work. And the reason for that is because when the previous government revised its approach to the original Three Waters legislation, they brought us into a sort of horizons-based entity rather than the 4 entities, and that made the Mayoral Forum the right place to be considering this sort of really big issue of strategic importance to the region. The project itself has had a really large financial component, which the consultancy GHD did for us, and for that we used our long-term plan years 1 to 10 final figures, but we also extended the model out to look at the years 11 to 30, because we knew that we needed to do that to identify any key issues and those sort of longer-term investment needs that we each had. One of the really big things that we did in that work was we assessed the impact of the Palmerston North City Council wastewater treatment plant and whether it should be considered inside or outside any joint arrangements. And we also considered the sub-regional variations, so we took an approach of how many of us at the edges could sort of fall out and look in another direction before something became unviable. And we made some assumptions and tested those around what a conservative and midpoint and an optimistic transition and approach could be to look at efficiency and cost ratios. It's fair to say that the numbers I'm going to present to you now are models. They're a way to compare options. They're not a prediction of the future state. And in particular, what you see up there is your year 10 status quo figure in the financial model is different to your LTP numbers, and there's sort of a number of mathematical reasons in the background for that. For the purposes of comparison, it's not so important. So it won't look familiar, it'll look roughly right, but it's okay is the short message there. So first of all, we took a really good look at the region, and I think it can be summed up by its coasts and its catchments. We run from Tararua in the east coast across to the west coast. We have some really distinct and different challenges around that. 5 of us have those coastal boundaries, whereas 2 are what I described as landlocked to an extent. And we've got 4 really big awa running through the region. So the Manawatu, the Rangateke, the Whangaihu and the Wanganui rivers really drive that
regional boundary, and you can see the different colours are the river catchments, which, as you would expect, do not match perfectly to our district council boundaries because that would be far too convenient. But that sort of paints a picture of how water moves naturally through our districts. The other really big feature from a geography point of view is that we're separated by two ranges, the Taurua and the Ruahine ranges, which means that the challenges on the east coast in the long term around climate change and resilience will be different to the challenges on the west coast over the long term. And underneath that, we had a good look at sort of where our key settlements are, what our population density is and things, and a lot of that can be summed up in these two diagrams, which show the wastewater and drinking water treatment plants, but mapped against population density. So the darker blue shows greater, denser population centres, and you can see, not surprisingly, that the population gets less dense the further north you move, and also that those little triangles of treatment and drinking water supplies are very closely correlated with population density. As I said, we looked at sort of how we do things. We have a variety of staffing and delivery models, from fully in-house models through to fully outsourced in Ruapehu, and obviously for Ruawhenua, through this whole process, you've also gone through a process of moving from external to internal. We also have a variety of approaches as to how we manage our assets and carry out our condition assessments. And 82 of our combined 300 consents are expired, with another 25% expiring before the end of 2029. And we're expecting Te Mata ROI and the regulators to put even more emphasis on that compliance as we move into the future. It's fair to say we've got to know each other pretty well through the last 8 to 9 months, and we've been pretty frank and honest about some of the challenges that we all face. So this sets out sort of some of the constraints as councils we all face, from needing to fund a range of priorities to project staging in terms of the capital investment that is required. Some known unknowns around the impact of changes to consenting and regulation. And also some internal ones that relate to sort of uncertainties that we know we each have in our long-term plans. And then some additional future costs that we know will be coming to us either individually or collectively that we'll need to deal with as a sector. And the main point of this is to sort of give you some reassurance that we looked at a lot of risks and issues in a fair degree of detail, and we feel pretty confident in knowing where those risks are. But also to sort of capture the fact that each of us faces a challenge of some sort. So what we each get from a joint model might be slightly different, but each of us are going to face challenges in the future that we will benefit from as well. So what did all this tell us? We think there's a pretty strong strategic case for taking some form of joint approach. We can retain the ownership and strategic direction of our assets as councils. We can perhaps have a better chance of meeting treaty obligations and community expectations about level of service and the quality of our rivers and waterways. We think that with greater numbers, we would have a shared voice and a greater negotiating position to influence government and those regulators. It would enable us to access the improved funding tools that the government is talking about bringing in. We think there's some real delivery outcomes from streamlining and consistency where we would see quite significant improvements, and it would give us more resilience and capacity to manage change. The financial case, however, is reasonably marginal. There are strategic benefits, we think, to including all of our capital costs, which outweigh any potential costs. The whole region will need to address its borrowing to revenue ratio. We think there's multiple ways to smooth the idea of tariff normalisation. And as I said, those efficiencies and cost savings, whilst we sort of took a fairly statistical and benchmarked approach to that, we also sort of backed that up with doing some analysis of where we think the those real opportunities are. And household affordability is about the same as current projections. So the year 10 modelled figure is roughly the same as a percentage of the regional household median income. I'll cover those off in just a little bit more detail, and then we can do some questions. So as I said, this was a big kind of thing to get out of the way, was the impact of including Palmerston North City Council's wastewater treatment plant inside or outside the model. And so we modelled keeping it in and keeping it out, and you can see that the additional cost per connection in year 10 is about $140. And we thought that on the whole, the strategic benefit of kind of taking an in-principle decision that everyone's capital projects would be included would be outweighed by that cost in the sort of year 10 and beyond. The second piece is that in year 10 there are some very clear sort of people who are contributing. You see their average rates go up compared to those who see them come down. So Horowhenua, Palmerston North, Rangitikei and Tararua see their rates come down on average in year 10, whereas Manawatu, Ruapehu and Wanganui see them go up. However, as I said, everyone benefits over the long term, and that position changes by year 30. So you can see that in Horowhenua, as you move into year 20 and year 30, you have become net beneficiaries. Rangitikei and Ruapehu have moved. Wanganui and Manawatu stay roughly in the same position. But that's part of, as I said, that sort of marginal financial case where things shift and move. And as we all know, predicting out 30 years is challenging at best. The other thing we looked at, as I said, was the number of different permutations of who might be in and who might be out. We know that you, as Horowhenua, also had options looking to the south. Tararua, the same, has options looking south to the Wairarapa, and Wanganui has options looking north into Taranaki, as do Ruapehu. So we sort of looked at all of that to understand how that might work. And again, as I say, the key thing here is that there's a really small margin of difference between everybody being in and any one of those options. So everyone in, if you rank it by the cost per connection in year 10, everybody in sits almost exactly in the middle of that model, with a little bit of variance, but there's sort of $200 in it from top to bottom. As I said, the whole region will need to address its borrowing to revenue ratio. This has been something that has the DAA guidance in the last few weeks last few weeks has changed from what we understood it to be. But at the end of the day, our borrowing for water collectively is under 5 times our collective revenue for water, but it is almost universally higher than a sort of 280% cap of revenue to debt. And it's important to note that within that, the sort of 280% is what a credit-rated council who borrows from the LGFA, it's the absolute maximum that can be borrowed at present. Across the 7 of us, there's 7 different approaches to that. Some of us have credit ratings, some of us don't. Some of us could borrow up to 280% but have self-imposed caps that are lower at sort of 200 or another thing. So there is a different set of parameters within that this sort of neatly sums up. But it does mean that sort of everyone's situation is subtly different. And as I said, the benefits some of us will see will relate to that debt position, and the benefits for others might relate to other factors. We took a really sort of blunt and simplistic approach to calculating that year 10 approach, year 10 cost per connection. And so that means that we think there's quite a few ways to smooth tariff normalisation into the future. So firstly, in a CCO situation, as I said, we'd be able to access 500% of our revenue to debt. And so we could make some use of that to smooth out those costs and extend them and spread them over more people into the future. You can see that blunt line that I talked about in the fact that on the left-hand side of every pair of those little bar graphs, you see the existing LTP projections, and everyone's pretty much does a shape that you would expect. It sort of rises fairly steadily or rises steadily and then smooths out. Whereas you can see that in the scenarios, because of the way the model worked, it bumps up and down a little bit more for each council. So that suggests that there's probably a more sophisticated approach to any normalisation that we chose to do that would see that smooth out. The other thing where there's some opportunity is charging and metering. Across the whole region, there's a variety of different approaches to charging and metering. Some have very little, apart from some specific rural schemes. Some have moved towards a lot more, and some in the middle, but no one has full metering at present. So that is a potential opportunity into the future. Also, our development contributions, 5 of us charge development contributions, 2 of us don't at all, which means, again, some opportunities there to sort of be more consistent across the whole region that would see some opportunities for the normalisation trend for the residential consumer. And the one that's not on there that should be is trade waste. So again, we have a variety of approaches to trade waste across the region, from charging only a handful of trade waste customers through to a couple of hundred. So again, a more uniform approach to that would perhaps offer some opportunities. And as I said, there's some tangible opportunities for working better and saving money as well. The modelling of efficiencies indicated that there was the potential to save sort of 5 to 50 million per year over 30 years. And that was backed up by, we have over some examples. So, for example, more streamlined approaches to procurement and contract management. We have over 500 waters-related contracts across the whole region. There is almost certainly some duplication in those where there's some opportunities to be more effective. We have 51 different ICT and operational technology systems across the 7 of us. I think the most is 4 of us using the same asset management system. So again, there's some opportunities there. And so we think we can also leverage sharing and reducing our compliance overhead as that new compliance cost comes in, being more joined up and more efficient in terms of our design and procurement and project management. The insourcing of some roles. So at the moment where we have pieces of work or roles that we either can't attract people to because we only really need half of a person with that skill set, or we pay consultants because we need half a person with that skill set. If you add that up, over 7 of us, you get to 3.5 people, and suddenly that becomes a small team as opposed to 7 individual external contracts. The debt optimisation and the financing opportunities that come with being a CCO, the consent rationalisation, being more joined up in our thinking about consents, and also becoming a more attractive employment offer to people and offering greater resilience and capacity within our organisations. And finally, as I said, that household affordability being about the same for each of us. For those who saw those prices come down in the model, it was quite a substantial impact on household affordability. For those of us where it went up slightly, it was only sort of 0.2, 0.3% of median household income. So that was a canter through a substantial piece of work, and that was reported to the Mayoral Forum in September, and we recommended some next steps, and we have been getting on with those ever since. So the first of those was that we would begin work on a joint water services delivery plan. The DIA guidance was that we should complete an individual one as a first step, because it essentially meant that all of our information got into that common format and we could understand how we might bring those together. So we've been working away at that. And we're just getting to the point where we'll begin to amalgamate and refine that information and understand how it meets the legislative requirements. We were also tasked with going away and doing a few pieces of appraisal work. One was a multi-criteria analysis of the service delivery models. One was looking at the shareholding and what that might affect. Also looking at the options for the shareholding committee, and looking at our options in relation to stormwater, where each council can choose how it treats stormwater in any joint arrangements, whether it puts it in or keeps it in-house. Crucially though, whatever we do, it has to be covered in the water services delivery plan. We have to describe each of us what we're doing with it. And secondly, councils, it's proposed, will remain responsible for stormwater, even if the service delivery shifts. Taking a look at an implementation plan and doing some thinking about joint planning if we were to decide to proceed with this option, because it's fair to say there is a lot of work to be done in a very short amount of time, and also moving forward with some more substantial iwi engagement at a more regional level as we sort of move into this phase of work. And I think you are all familiar with the fact that a decision is reasonably imminent in terms of what we would all like to consult on in the new year. So we've been going through that appraisal of the service delivery models. I think you're probably all familiar that there are 5 models and also arrangements under the Local Government Act. 2 of those, the single council CCO and the multi-council CCO, can access the up to 500% that the LGFA has been talking about. And it is these ones that we are looking at in terms of joint models. So if we proceed with a joint model in the Manawatu Wanganui region, what is the best joint model for us to look at? And at the moment, we're sort of about 3/4 of the way through that work. But it's probably fair to say that the multi-council CCO is scoring more strongly. And that is because it retains the ownership with councils in the way that the community trust models don't. And that so far seems to be a fairly big and important piece for all of us as councils. We've done some work to look at the principles for the shareholding committee. And this is the committee, for want of a better word, that would appoint the directors, remove the directors, and also set the letter of expectation that goes to those directors and provide overall oversight back in that conduit between councils and the CCO. At the moment, we're working to some principles, which is that it should be as small as possible or can't be too big. That it should have equal representation for participating councils, which is divorced and unrelated to their shareholding percentage. That there's a role for iwi representation that brings a Te Ao Māori perspective to those shareholder decisions, and it should draw on existing good practice from both the local government and the water sectors, and particularly the region, to inform that direct development. And that Horizon's role as regulator precludes them from being part of that governance mechanism.
That's a question.
Of course.
I might not have this correct, but I understand that Palmerston North City Council have either discussed or passed a resolution that is inconsistent with that second bullet. So this is where PNCC have basically said, because we've got more connections, we should have greater representation. Is that, if that is the position that's being taken, how is that then reconciling with that? And yeah, isn't that, if they've taken that decision, then isn't that fatal to, yeah.
Bernie may wish to speak about fatality, but they have, I think it's a case of this is probably reasonably fast moving. There's lots to work through. This was the starting position of mayors. The technicality of the resolution from PNCC last week, because I'm the kind of geek who goes back and re-listens to these things, was that they asked officers when they bring their report back in December to have given due consideration to that idea and set out the rationale and the pros and cons in both directions. So I think it's an important piece of work that all 7 of us are supporting our PNCC colleagues on, because obviously part of the pros and cons of each option is what the view of their 6 neighbours is. So it's not completely at odds, but there is some work to be done, and sort of feedback from other councils and mayors is probably quite a crucial part of that work.
Yeah, you're right. It's already causing a degree of conversation around, and received yesterday an email from another mayor in the region who basically said, you know, they might have that right, but we've also got the right then to say no. And so there's some further conversations to have in that space, but the indications are, even from the mayor of Palmerston North, was to say he didn't think that that would actually end up being a requirement from them. But would have to. They have passed that resolution, though, as you say.
And so in that table earlier, that had the different options with people in or out, there was a model with PNCC out? Yeah, okay.
And I can't remember where it sits in the table, but yeah. Yeah, so without them, it gets marginally more expensive than having us all in. They're number 7. Yeah. Because as I was saying about what we all bring to the party and that's both positive and negative, they bring an awful lot of connections. That's right. Yes. So and Horizon's role, as I said, precludes them from being part of that. So the other thing that we've been working on is a sort of implementation plan. And a few kind of comments on practicality in terms of this. One is, if this was the decision of how to move forward, the implementation to whatever the new model is wouldn't start the day after we submit our water services delivery plan next year. There's a few kind of mechanics to go through before then. It would need to be adopted by councils. In June, it would then be submitted to the minister. They would confirm they have up to 3 months to tell if it's acceptable or not. Assuming it is acceptable, we would begin implementation in sort of November next year. And in terms of the more sort of the less nuts and bolts side of it, at the moment we're sort of working to an assumption of 12 to 18 months for that transition to then happen. One way of doing it that's sort of the current under discussion is you'd sort of set up your CCO, you would recruit your board and your CE and senior leadership team, and then you would transition people and assets and operations in a sort of phased and staggered way. So there's some further discussion to be had about that. As I said, this all moves quite quickly, but that's certainly kind of a model that could work and leave us all with enough time to plan properly for what that transition might look like. So that is probably everything that I have prepared to say, but I'm very happy to take any questions that you have and hear your thoughts and comments more generally.
Catherine, I asked a question of Dougal earlier. I'll ask you here as well for your thoughts, and it's around that one of local influence. The bigger entity, the concern has long been that perhaps some areas might not have the reach, and from us as who advocate for our communities, communities will still come to us for solutions and advocacy for solutions. So I guess the ability for us in a bigger, wider organisation to have that ability to influence and get resolutions to some issues that might be small in nature in the wider scheme, but important for those people who are affected. So can you make any comment on that?
I think there's 2 sides to that. and I would love to know what Dougal said. But I think one is that there are elements to which this is designed to perhaps restrict or constrain some of that direct influence. And I think that is probably reflective of a model that will increasingly put the consumer kind of front and centre. But in the short term, I think all of that level of control that you would expect from a normal CCO would remain. So the statement of the letter of expectation, the statement of intent, those really tight relationships between councils and their boards of directors remain important. I think those board of directors and CEs will be very focused on compliance, the renewals that ensure that compliance. They will be statutorily obligated to be focused on how they're supporting growth of different districts and regions. So I think a lot of those local priorities will be front and centre of mind. I think in terms of how you directly influence some of the littler things, that will play out through relationships in the same way that it does now. So the strength of relationships and the way that we build those, and we build them into things like shareholding committees and the way we work together and set letters of expectation will all make a difference.
Following on from Dougal's presentation, he shared with us the level of investment expected under a Wellington model in terms of $250 million for keep up, $200 million for catch up, $150 million for growth. I guess really I'd like to hear, you might know off the top of your head, but at some point about how the all-in model stacks up in terms of that longer term view of level of investment on a per annum basis, particularly when we start to talk about it being financially marginal, because I think it's about delivery or the ability or capacity to deliver in that longer term that I'm probably interested in knowing more.
I don't have the number off the top of my head, and I'm wondering if my pretty graph will tell me. But what I can tell you is that we as a region are in a very different situation to Wellington. So we didn't need to do an analysis about catch up and everything else because we are simply not in that place. And I say that with all love and respect for the challenges that Wellington is facing at the moment. So we were able to look at it much more at that high level, as I said, about the risks and the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns that we had. And that was sort of able to boil down to kind of half a dozen, 2 or 3 things each. And I think in terms of the investment, if you that graph there is showing that in year 2 of all of our LTPs, we're spending 300 million, it must be, as planned investment. And so we simply accumulated what we already knew in our LTPs was needed because we were all reasonably confident in those as a robust set of numbers.
There was a figure you had on one of the slides about the consents. I think it was earlier, and it was 300 consents across the all-in. 82 of them have already expired, and 25% are due to expire before 2029. So it's like almost 50% of the consents in the region require some sort of action before 2029. And so, yeah, I kind of just wanted to, it's just been just playing on my mind in terms of what it actually means and whether it means that the focus of the model is actually going to be on sorting out consents and dealing with it just seems like a really short-term need and focus that might really have a dominating effect on how the organisation is focused and where it's operating initially.
I think it's a challenge that we all face. So I suspect that every single one of us is internally focused at present on that compliance issue. I suppose the opportunity that presents is if two of us next door to each other have similar consents coming due for renewal in the next 5 years, which of these models gives us the better opportunity to talk about those in a joined up way, to plan for them together, and to perhaps end up with one consent that serves both our needs or all our needs, or whatever is appropriate, but rather than each of us just focusing on our individual clump of them, that's where the opportunity sits, is being more joined up. So I think all of us are going to be focused on compliance for the next 5 years, if not more. Most of us will have planned for that in our LTPs already. If you bring it into aggregate, though, that's where the opportunities, yeah.
You showed or said that we across councils treat development contributions differently, or some don't even have them, as well as trade waste. Effectively, bylaws are all different. So who and how will determine the alignment of bringing those together, and will it be that advisory, will it be the new entity board, or will it be mayors, and like, is there even conversation at the various tables, or it's basically here's some direction and give it over, and you just get the result?
It's a very good question, and it's one to which I don't fully know the answer at the moment, if I'm being completely honest. So I think there would be the things that we do know are that the DIA has indicated that the sort of power to set DCs and collect DCs, that in legislation they will allow for that to kind of easily port across to any CCOs that get set up. And I think trade waste the same. And I think both of those would be kind of interim arrangements for a number of years while they work through the rest of the detail. Yeah. But in terms of kind of the mechanics of everyone being able to function as is, that will work through. In terms of harmonising across that or standardising, I think there's probably two parts to that answer that we'd want to find out a little bit more about. One is how much will that legislative change affect that? Like, would you go, actually, let's just wait until we get down the line? The other thing that we perhaps need to understand a bit more of is, would that be something that could be then set within a letter of expectation, or would it not be? And I think that again comes back to relationships and dialogue, because I can also imagine if a letter of expectation got drafted that said, we don't want any changes to our DC's policies, don't harmonise them, don't do anything, the CE and the board of directors or the chair of that board might sit down and go, that's fine, we can do that, but these would be the implications. Are you okay with that? And that might be part of that conversation in those first few years. So I think there is a lot that will remain a little bit uncertain, but it is where some opportunity is.
Oh, sorry, you're going to turn off, I think. Just more of a comment rather than a question, just following up on Clint and Sam's topics. In some ways, Wellington's being a little bit more transparent and open and saying, hey, we do have these problems that we do need to plan for and have a vision for. Whereas I kind of feel that's missing a little bit in this model, in the sense that we've just analysed status quo, LTPs, where everyone's doing it. It just seems to be business as usual rather than thinking of what are the real gaps going forward 10 years, 30 years in some of our local areas, I suppose. It's a bit more colloquial focused, I suppose. I mean, we've factored in Palmerston's aspirations around their wastewater, but not some of the looming things that we see some of these other small districts as well.
We could only work with what we had, would be my first observation there. And I think, as I said, we tested and were kind of critical friends to each other to a reasonable extent. There is a lot of knowledge and expertise around that table of the seven of us, of neighbours and people who've been working in the sector for a long time. So a kind of good grasp of what people's challenges are. And I think on the whole, most things are captured. And I think that was one of the reasons for extending out to 30 years, was because it picks up the things that get bumped into the future perhaps more than they should. But some of the reason that those get bumped into the future are for the reasons that are the same around other council tables. Every council grapples at the time of long-term planning with balancing what we need to do, what we'd like to do, and what we can afford to do. And that is a set of challenges and constraints that you are all familiar with, that kind of turns into our LTP figures.
I was just wondering, once we get all the documentation that you've said you're doing analysis on, is there a possibility? Do we have a need for that worst case scenario across this region for what we could be steering at in the future if we wanted to improve things? I know it's hard to answer in the sense that everyone's already planned out and you've got everything there.
I think we're reasonably comfortable that we don't need to do that. And one of the other aspects of it is that in taking that decision, that if something arose that was completely unexpected and of a similar scale to PNCC, by building in that if we're in, we're all in together approach, that means that those challenges would be met collectively by that bigger group, rather than for example, PNCC being able to turn around and go, well, we needed your help 20 years ago and you weren't up for it. So that was part of the reason for sort of going, it's worth it to be in it together, because we know what the biggest problem is. Anything else is probably going to be smaller, or of that scale, it would be very surprising.
Just for clarity, I noticed on one of those slides that the two options that give that 500% funding ceiling is a standalone council CCO and a multi one, but a standalone council can access that funding to that level. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, subject to prudent borrowing criteria.
Catherine, can you just go back to the graph where you showed the line where some councils were below the line and others? Yeah, that one. When Dougal sort of talked about the cost to serve across, so that every part of the region would actually rate their cost to serve, we're obviously doing a harmonised model. And I suppose the risk is, and this is probably for my colleagues, in terms of those that believe that they're subsidising the rest of the region, especially in that first 10 years or so, will have some reservations about doing that and the impact that that will have on their individual ratepayers. What is, say, because I'm surprised that those figures aren't, don't vary as much as they could have. There is only a small difference between what is charged even over that 10-year period. And so just some thoughts around, because I'm thinking they won't include establishment costs. It does. Okay. All right. Well, that makes a little bit of a difference then too. And that would be regardless of how many of us are in as well, I assume. Yeah.
I think there'd be a little bit of saving if there was less of us, but there's also a point where there's a kind of minimum cost to set up a thing and bring people together.
But obviously, on that graph, Manawatu and yourselves are those that are subsidising the rest of the district or the region for quite some time. So it must be challenging, I suppose, for your councillors to accept that a regional model might work.
I probably can't speak for Manawatu. No. I can speak for Wanganui to an extent, and I think that is an issue that councillors are grappling with and taking a really sort of thoughtful approach to understanding where that financial benefit or cost might be, and at the same time weighing that up with the benefits of being more collective and wider ranging in our approach. So I don't think this is an easy conversation for any council around the country or around the region at the moment. The stand-up costs are included in that, and our assumptions about cost efficiencies were reasonably conservative, even at the optimistic end, because we knew that one of the things where previous models had come a cropper was about sort of being wildly optimistic in a way that meant no one quite bought the argument.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Yeah. My learned friend here. Councillor Proctor, Catherine has just pointed out to me that the big leaps in Rangitika and Ruapehu's darker purple bars reflect those big costs that are sort of pushed out into the latter years. But it's in there in a manner of speaking.
Sorry, Catherine, can you just the next steps thing so that so in terms of and Monique, you might be able to tell just in terms of what our timeline is for the next few weeks in terms of what we've got in front of us.
Yeah, so 6th of November, we're bringing back to council another workshop, which is a follow-on from the workshop last week, where we started at a high level to kind of compare the different options. And so the 6th of November is where we take today's presentations and all of the work that Morris and Lowe have been doing on our behalf to weigh up the different options or dance partners available to council, to essentially get you to a point where when you read the agenda for the 27th of November council meeting, nothing is a surprise because you've been well briefed. You've had the opportunity to dig deep, but then on the 20th of November we will release the council agenda for a decision on the 27th of November where council will need to rule out some options and give commitment to the options that it is going to continue to pursue, noting of course that the number of options we keep in the mix does increase the resourcing requirement that we need to put into the development of our water services delivery plan. So, 27th of November is a decision where you'll say yes/maybe to some options and no to some other options. Ahead of that, we are commencing our light touch engagement with community, where we're not asking them whether we should go with particular geographical locations. We're asking them for their input into what are the things that matter. What are the things that, as you've shaped the multi-criteria analysis, what are those things that communities say is more important that should help influence your decision? Catherine Pollock, have I forgotten anything?
Can I just ask, so we'll get some of these documents by that workshop, will we? Or?
They're in the portal. Yeah. So I think you got an email earlier in the week, and there's a special folder that even. Okay. Paul's got access to it. If you have any trouble accessing the documentation, let the democracy team know, and we will assist you.
Well, you did a fantastic job with your questions without doing the reading. So well done, team. But I also want to acknowledge that I haven't put in like mayor and elected member briefings and things like that. So just because it would have been information overload for you all, but what I'm going to start doing is I'll slowly put across Wellington and Manawatu Wanganui and any other presentations that we've received that might be useful. They'll appear in the portal as well. So you might just find that it gets fuller and fuller in there.
So you're fully over all this and you've got it all understood. And obviously, look, it's complex and it's difficult to understand and comprehend everything that you're being given at the moment. But as we said before, we're in the luxury of having a number of different options that we can have a look at and understand what is the best for us. But that 6th of November obviously is a pretty crucial information sharing workshop in terms of comparing all those. So hopefully after that we'll be in a much better position to be able to understand what the decision is that we need to make on the 27th of November. But in the meantime, obviously, if there's issues or questions that you have, please ask, and we will try our best to answer those. Thank you for coming down, Catherine. Really appreciate it. It's been very helpful to understand that thing and having a wider sort of regional view now, because while we've understood we're doing it, to actually see some figures and things like that is really good in that presentation. So thank you very much. And again, all the work that you've all been doing in terms of that space is really appreciated. Cheers.